Okay, it's 5:30. I'm going to go over the script for remote conducted open meetings, so bear with me. This open meeting of the Select Board is being conducted remotely pursuant to the Chapter 20 of Acts of 2021. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, we will be convening by video conference via Zoom webinar as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Now we'll get to confirming member access. We'll start with Select Board members. If you are here, please identify yourself in the affirmative. See who I've got here. Don Holgate.
Here.
Move my screen a little bigger. Christy Ferrantella.
Here.
Do we have Matt? Is Matt here? I'm looking around. Let's see. Okay, we'll go to staff. I'll just start from the top. Vicki Marsh, Town Council.
Present.
Hi, Vicki.
Hi.
John Giorgio.
Here.
Amy Baxter.
Here.
Ken Bogrant.
Here.
Greg Tibnan.
Here.
Erica Mooney.
Present.
Libby Gibson.
Here.
Go through here. Marina Devonik.
Here.
Tucker Holland.
Here.
Brian Turbot.
In attendance.
Jericho Melee.
Here.
And let's see, Andrew Vorse.
Here.
Yeah, I think I've got all staff there. Let me know if I forgot anybody. Anticipated speakers, we have Senator Julian Sear. Hey, Julian. And we flip through here.
Hey there.
Hey, oh, there's Mr. Matt Fee. Hi, Matt. We have Charity Grace, legislative liaison to Mr. Fernandez. Hi, Charity.
Hi.
Is Dylan on yet? Is he here? No.
I don't think he's joined yet, but he.
Emma Seeger. Hi, Bianca Brown.
Present.
Elena Greenlee, also from Semester Cinema.
Here.
Okay, Erica, did I get everybody? Oh, Jeff Carlson from Natural Resources. Hey, Jeff.
Good evening, guys.
Also, Representative Fernandez came on. Did you already call him?
I did not. Hi, Dylan.
Hopped on.
Hey.
And then Ashley Benson is also here.
Hello.
Hi there. Okay, let me get through this reading. We are using Zoom webinar for this meeting, which allows public to participate in the meeting as attendees. Registration link can be found on description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed. I'll call on those who have raised their hands. All supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along. Some housekeeping: if you're not getting ready to speak or it's not your agenda item, please turn off your video and please mute yourself. And each vote taken tonight will be conducted by roll call. Okay, one day I'm gonna try to see if I can do that by memory. All right, so we'll call to order the Select Board meeting for February 23rd, 2022. It's 5:34. No changes to the agenda that I'm aware of. Announcements, Libby?
Thank you. So we've just got that this meeting is being video and audio recorded. The Select Board is accepting applications to fill a vacant alternate seat on the Planning Board. And those applications are due Friday, the 25th of February. The Select Board will be making an appointment on Wednesday, March 23rd. And if we get, Erica, I think if we get applications in, we'll make note of it as they come in after the 25th in accordance with the committee appointment policy.
So starting at our next meeting, March 9th, and at our meeting on March 16th, the list of applicants and their applications will be in the packets for the board and the public to review.
Thank you. And the application information for anybody interested is on the town website. And we've got our legislative representatives here tonight. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 suggested pending legislative items for them to go over, and I guess anything else that is of public interest. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to just take those as there's somewhat listed in the packet.
Yeah, I think they can, Senator Julian Sear and Representative Dylan.
Sure.
Thank you for being here. You can go one by one, or you can kind of, I'm sure there's maybe some other things you want to talk about as well.
Sure, we can piggyback as we always do.
Sure.
First of all, it's good to be with all of you. And while this continues to be a bizarre, challenging time, actually, remote participation in this way, allows us to have conversations sort of more directly with the island as much as we like getting out there for in-person gatherings. Always grateful to have the partnership of Dylan, of Representative Fernandez. We really work hand in glove in trying to show up for our island constituents. And I think for a lot of the unique challenges that face a very special community 26 miles out to sea. And I think we're proud of what we've been able to do in the last 5, now going on 6 years. And you'll continue to see our strong commitment to engaging with all of you. I can give a little bit of an update and then sort of kick it over to Dylan as well. And I think we're glad to get into any questions that y'all might have. Just for a legislative timing perspective, we have about 5 months left of the legislative session. So the formal sessions in the legislature will end July 31st. And formal sessions are basically the format where we debate and pass legislation that may be controversial, that members can object to. Once we go into, we continue in formal sessions, from August through the end of the session. The new session doesn't start until I think the first Wednesday in January. So depending on what the legislation is, we either have to get it done by July 31st, if it's a matter that has some controversy, basically, if it's a matter that any one member can object to, and for more routine items, like many home rule petitions, those can proceed, and those do proceed, and the legislature works on those through the end of the end of the session. As Dylan is fond of saying and pointing out, I believe Nantucket has a municipality with the most home rules of any municipality in Massachusetts, and there's 351 of them. So you definitely make sure that we work hard on your behalf. And these home rules sort of fall into sort of 2 buckets, right? There are home rules of what I would consider sort of a routine and non-controversial matter, which sort of only affect Nantucket and don't have sort of an effect elsewhere in the Commonwealth. A good example of this is House Bill 1404, which is an act authorizing Nantucket land transfers. The House passed this legislation at the end of January. It's before the Senate. We will take this up and we will get it done. Similar bills related to, an act relative to the Nantucket Audit Committee, to an act authorizing Nantucket to issue pension obligation bond notes, an act amending the charter of the town of Nantucket. These are routine matters that we will continue to work through the process and we will get done. Nantucket, of course, there's no shortage of big challenges facing the island. And so that's reflected in your home rules. You also have a second bucket of home rule petitions that are, I wouldn't say more controversial in nature, right? But that are not as routine as pension obligation, or as boring, right? As pension, important but boring, right? As pension allegations, auditing, what have you. A really good example of that, and I think we'll get into a real conversation of this, is the efforts around establishing a real estate transfer fee on housing. Another example of this is an act relative to recreation on private tidelands. That, of course, is a bill that Dylan and I filed, but certainly we know Nantucket actually is a really good example and model, given that y'all enshrine public access to all your beaches, across the island. Another example of things that are sort of a little more controversial and harder to get through in a routine matter would be, an act prohibiting the use of mobile gear in the waters off the town of Nantucket. So we work sort of doggedly and persistently on these issues, but if those home rules and those bills are going to pass, they're going to need to happen before the end of the formal session by July 31st. I think we have some other updates, and maybe Dylan, I'll let you go into the Steamship Authority legislation that we filed, and I think a few of these other issues. I'll just briefly touch on the transfer fee legislation. This is going to play out exactly how expansion of room occupancy tax or short-term rentals played out. So y'all will recall that long before Dylan and I were in these seats, probably more than a decade ago, towns like Nantucket, like Provincetown, filed home rule petitions to give municipalities the ability to tax short-term rentals just the same way that we tax traditional motels and hotels. And a groundswell of support sort of happened from that, right? So first, Nantucket was first, then you had Provincetown, then Wealthy got involved, then Truro, then you got some interest on some island towns in Martha's Vineyard. Then the city of Cambridge got involved, the city of Somerville, the city of Boston. And those home rules essentially indicate the desire of a number of municipalities to essentially allow a local option, to allow local authority, local regulation, in this case, local taxation. And that's what's going to play out here when it comes to transfer fees. Maybe, almost 6 years ago when Dylan and I filed this first transfer fee legislation, and y'all were the first in the Commonwealth, there could have been an argument made akin to how we got the land bank through, where basically you sort of say, Nantucket is a super special snowflake. It doesn't sort of apply to anywhere else in the Commonwealth. They should have the ability to do this. Given the number of, and Nantucket is a special snowflake, right? But given the number of other municipalities who've also wanted to opt in, to this, and given the housing crisis that we're seeing across Eastern Massachusetts, and really we're seeing across much of the country or certain parts of the country, actually particularly in Blue America, that this is the policy that has resonance for municipalities across Massachusetts, and there's going to be a desire to get those done. The fact that have Truro and Provincetown and Chatham and now Somerville and Cambridge and Boston and other cities, there's cities in Western Massachusetts who are looking to do this. This all spells very good things in my estimation for action here. I am not worried. There was sort of this one-off article today in the Nantucket Current. I don't know how that article happened. I wish someone would have picked up the phone and talked to me or talked to Dylan. I'm not concerned about Boston sort of skipping the line here on Nantucket. I think having someone like Michelle Wu, who is a personal friend of mine and someone who I've worked very closely on policy with for a number of years, having someone like Mayor Wu, Mayor Ballantyne in Somerville, who's also newly elected, the city of Cambridge, this is going to play out just like short-term occupancy, right? And it's basically going to lead to a groundswell that's going to sort of push over, the sort of opposition we see largely among sort of the statewide real estate interests. So I actually think that the fact that Boston has filed a home rule is very encouraging. I think the real question is, does this happen and does this get done in the next 5 months? The vehicle by which this probably would get done is an economic development bond bill. That's the similar vehicle that we got housing choice legislation passed through at the end of 2020. And housing choice is making a difference, particularly the provision in housing choice related to limiting litigation and these sort of superfluous NIMBY lawsuits. On Cape Cod, there's already actually been two cases that have been thrown out with these provisions. Essentially, they require the people who are filing them to basically post a bond, right, to pay for the case if they lose. So we're forcing the NIMBYs to put their money where their mouth is. So I'm confident this is going to happen. What I don't know is, does this happen in the next 5 months or does it happen in the next session? But I'll just end on this. There is a real palpable change in that housing has been a crisis for over 20 years here in our communities. I remember reading the local papers, right, when I was in middle school, right? So circa like 1999, 2000, I was one of those kids who'd like read the local papers, talking about the housing crisis on Cape Cod, on Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. And the problem has only grown more and more acute. I'd actually argue, with the exception of Nantucket and maybe Provincetown to a lesser extent, most communities on Cape Cod and the islands have done very little on housing. Nantucket really deserves to be applauded for the creativity and the aggressiveness by which you folks are willing to address this problem. You also have the biggest problem of anyone, right? Because you have the highest property values, property prices of any place, in Massachusetts. But, we're seeing the aftermath of this pandemic or the whatever we're moving into in this pandemic. And people are realizing that if we don't rapidly change what we're doing, we're not going to have year-round communities. And I'm talking about, I can go through and list off 24 of my friends who, live on the Outer Cape where I live, right? Who are housing insecure. I've experienced housing insecurity on the Outer Cape. I essentially lost an apartment I had. The landlord opted not to extend the lease and rented it for $25,000 for June 15th to September 1st. I'm the state senator. I'm a pretty connected person, and I, by the way, make quite a bit deal more money than many of my constituents. We are in a complete crisis. What we do now in the next several years is going to determine whether or not these are sustainable communities or whether or not these are just going to be playgrounds for the uber rich with an underclass of a workforce. That's deeply problematic. I could not be more worried about this issue. I wish that all 20 communities that I represent were pursuing this issue with the urgency that Nantucket is. You folks really are the model here, but you also have a really steep problem. And so, you can count on me and Dylan to do everything we can to try to give y'all the tools to fix this. Look, for better or worse, land use policy in Massachusetts is decided at the local level. I've got a lot of thoughts on that. We can have a whole academic conversation about how local control of zoning has essentially led to very classist and racist consequences and has not built the housing stock that we need. That being said, that's the world we're living in. I know it's not going to change, at least not yet. And so you can count on us to do everything we can to get this transfer fee done. I think there's some conversation about potentially attaching some stipulations to this transfer fee. For instance, a municipality can opt in, so long as they're spending a certain percentage of their CPA funds on housing, so long as they, have areas zoned in the town for multi-unit development, different thresholds that Nantucket's already met, and that wouldn't affect you folks. So I actually feel optimistic, and I feel reinforced to have, the city of Boston and Cambridge and Somerville and Cape Towns, joining on to what y'all started in Nantucket. I think this spells really good things. And the real question is whether or not we get this done in the next 5 months. So that was a lot from me. I wanted to sort of give an update there. And I'll just close, really big shout out continuing to the town, Libby, Roberto, the entire team who's been responding to COVID has continued to throw all sorts of unexpected curveballs at us. We've done everything we can to collaborate and to provide support from the mainland and partnership, certainly when we can, but just want to acknowledge that really hard work in a situation that continues to be frustrating and difficult, but I think we've been able to come through it all right. So that's it from me. Dylan, I'll turn it over to you.
Before we go to Dylan, Senator's here. Thank you for that. If it's okay with you, Dylan, Mr. Fee's had his hand up for a while. I think something you said in the beginning.
Hey, Matt.
Hand went up.
Hey, good to see you. No,
Good to
quick
see you.
question. You were talking about like home rule petitions in Nantucket. Should our citizens feel reluctant to send home rule petitions up? That's kind of what they're made to feel sometimes. Should we feel reluctant and only send a few up, or what's your advice to us?
My advice is, look, the town meeting of Nantucket is your legislative body. The select board is the executive body of the town. I'm pretty partial to the authority of legislative bodies. If you take a look at how we do our business in Massachusetts, we give a lot of authority to legislative bodies. So, look, I think this is sort of democracy, direct democracy at its best. And I think we tease you folks just a little bit given the volume, but I would say that I think actually a lot of really good ideas come out of Nantucket, and I think the willingness of the town, to put forward ideas that at first may be kind of controversial or out there. This transfer fee is a really good example of that. Other municipalities take a look at that and follow suit. So I'd actually say I would encourage you folks to keep governing how you're governing, and we'll do our best to meet the moment. I think I would just understand the legislative process can be it can be lengthy and a little frustrating, and so bear with us as we're going through as we get some of these things done, and also understand that on some of the more controversial ideas, transfer fee being one, right? It's very hard to get those passed sort of in one fell swoop, but really having the town put these forward again and again truly actually moves policy in Massachusetts, and I think is a really effective tool. So I'd say keep doing what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Sorry. I know we tease you guys on that a lot. But I think I'm glad you asked the question.
I get teased a lot. I'm used to it.
Us too.
If it's okay, can we go to Tucker? I think he has a question for you, Senator's here.
Thanks very much,
Of course.
Chairman and Senators here. And, as you and Representative Fernandez, know well, I and all of us here greatly appreciate the efforts that you are putting in to get this transfer fee done. And we know that it's not easy going with the opposition from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. But I agree with much of what you were saying there in terms of the palpable change in the conditions and the support for this type of measure, and maybe the understanding how it really is required. I think that if there were some criteria along the lines that you talked about, like, hey, you can't just reach for this first, you need to be using CPA funds and showing other demonstrated support for housing. Of course, we're all in favor of something like that. As you know, we're doing it in spades. I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. And I understand that making the sausage isn't always pretty, but I heard you say that Boston is not going to get something if Nantucket is not also getting something. Is that correct?
Over my goddamn body, over my dead body, right? No way in hell are we going to allow the city of Boston to get this tool and not have this tool available to our municipalities. It's just, and it's kind of not how, even from a legislative perspective, right? Sometimes the legislature can be risk averse.
Yep.
Why come back? If we just approve this for the city of Boston, one, I'm going to oppose this in the Senate. I'm, one of the higher ranking members of the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
We actually don't, we don't actually have a senator who lives in Boston who's in leadership in the Senate. The Senate is the House. So there's a lot of kind of Boston has the most members. Boston kind of runs the show. A little bit more in the Senate. No way. But also, why would we allow something for Boston when we know that we're going to have to turn around and next session, Cambridge is going to want it, Somerville's going to want it, Nantucket's going to want it. There's a whole host of communities in Western Mass who want this. So it would be, I could actually envision the opposite happening, right? Like several years ago saying, hey, Nantucket's this totally kind of unique thing, right? Look, it's this international resort island, 26 miles out to sea. This is different. But it just doesn't, one, we've had a lot more municipalities act on it. So the city of Boston, right, would oppose if we did something for Nantucket and didn't do something for them. I think what it shows that there's a real chorus of municipalities who are wanting to see us take action here. And, you can see the pieces aligning where, you've got Michelle Wu, who's closely allied with Aaron Michaelwitz, who's the House Ways and Means chair, and a lot of sort of close alliances on these housing related issues particularly among the millennial members. We feel viscerally I'm priced out of my communities from a housing perspective, and I make a lot of money. I make a lot of money for compared to a lot of people, right? I'm talking about that in caucus with my colleagues, right? I'm making it personal. They get it. And so I just don't foresee a world where we would pass something for Boston and leave everyone else out. One, because you're going to create a whole host of problems on the floor, right, with other members objecting to it. But then two, you basically just kick the can down the road on the issue. If you're going to do something, you do a local option. You basically give a local option for, all the municipalities stopped into. I'm kind of a fan of this idea of having some strings attached to things because I worry that like not every community is Nantucket. Like my hometown, Troro's done nothing. Troro's done like nothing on housing. It's like super pathetic. I want to make sure, I want them to rezone North Truro and have it be, 2 families. Fine. You want to transfer facts? You got to do that. So it's just a matter of timing. And that's why us pushing now and us working in concert with Boston and a whole host of these other advocates, that's what's going to get this done. Does that make sense?
It does. And, I really appreciate all of that. I think there seems to be some I guess if you look at the recent Boston Globe editorial, sort of promoting I think the editorial staff actually forgot that they endorsed Nantucket's legislation 4 years ago, but their recent editorial on Friday was very pro-Boston and seemed to lump everyone else into, well, that's more complicated, that's different, and so forth. And that's a Boston-based paper making the point and maybe arguing for something they see as useful to their municipality. You guys are in the room and really, on the field. And so hearing what you have shared is just very helpful and reassuring to us.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan, you should get in here because Dylan's been doing a tremendous amount of work, on this in the House, and really, I think, this is where I think the change is going to happen. So Dylan, why don't we kick this over to you? I've talked long enough, and add some more color and perspective to what we're trying to do here. Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators here.
Okay. Well, great. I mean, hard to follow Julian. But always a pleasure to do it and work so closely with them. It's good to be with you guys. I will keep things relatively brief because I know you guys have a lot on your plate. I think that, what Julian, I agree with everything, all of Julian's assessments on the housing issue. The only thing I'd chime in, because you mentioned the Globe article, I think that's actually only a positive if the Boston Globe is editorializing, focusing on the Boston Globe or on Boston's transfer fee, because then that actually puts more pressure on the members within the city of Boston who might not know a lot about the transfer fee or might be a little reluctant or have questions about it. That actually kicks them into gear a little more too. So I actually think that could only be a positive as well. As we already mentioned, we've passed 3 home rule petitions already through the House for Nantucket. I'm still gonna give Matt a hard time with the number of home rule petitions you guys send up, but again, we don't mind doing it. We're happy to get them passed. And I do want to mention too that last week in the House we passed a piece of legislation. It wasn't on the agenda, but it's something that I actually hear a ton about from Nantucketers, which is allowing undocumented immigrants to get a driver's license. This is a really big deal for both islands that have a huge immigrant population. That's really the backbone of the workforce on both islands. And I remember back in Roberto and Nantucket were really effective advocates for this legislation. And there was actually a WBUR article that traced back a COVID outbreak on Nantucket to undocumented immigrants all having to pack into the same vehicle because they didn't have licenses to drive their own vehicles. So, this is going to be a really big change for a lot of deeply vulnerable families on island. One of the most heart-wrenching pieces was a bunch of vineyarders came to the State House to advocate for this. And they told their high school kids, telling me about how they're terrified to get into cars with their parents just to get dropped off at a friend's house or a sports game or what have you, because of that status issue. So that's going to be a big deal for Nantucket, and we're glad to see that changed. One thing Julian didn't mention was around, and I know it's on the agenda you guys sent, was around the steamship legislation. This is just a relatively small tweak to the legislation, to the steamship statute. It comes out of an early deep dive audit report done several years ago on the steamship's operations, and that came from you guys didn't really experience this, but your sister island, in a short couple month period, 550 boats were canceled. 18 the steamship, a couple of steamship boats lost power, stranding people for hours at a time. Another one ran aground in Vineyard Haven Harbor. At one point during this period, 5 out of 10 boats were out of commission, and on the Vineyard, it was chaos. We heard from hundreds of constituents about this. The news was all over it, and there were literally thousands of people stranded at terminals in a very a not nice time of year to be stranded and having to find hotels and the like. And so the public called for an audit report to be done in the steamship's operations, and they did this deep dive $250,000 report, and they found some real serious problems that needed to be fixed, and that ultimately led to this breakdown of a lifeline that all islanders depend on. And so they made a series of recommendations based upon their findings. The report's publicly listed, so I won't get into all the details, but it's about 200 pages. It's on the steamship's website, so you can just go ahead and Google it. But one key recommendation, and I actually called the auditors and the authors and auditors of the report, was that they implement a chief operating officer position into the management structure. This is for a number of reasons outlined in the report. The short reason is that the current way that it's structured is it's a really flat management structure where the head is making a lot of day-to-day decisions rather than doing a lot of long-term thinking and planning and averting some of these crises that have occurred. So it's a really small change just to add in a COO position. And it's something that we have filed in statute, but I know that the board has been looking at doing that themselves. Which, I think that is something we'd be amenable to as well. I don't think it needs to be in statute if the board wants to do it, but certainly we're going to get it there some way. We're going to get it there one way or another. The other piece is just adding term limits to 9 years in total, three-year terms, brings it in line with just kind of best practices for these types of boards, allows for a more transparent runway on when people are going to be replaced, and allows for a more kind of open and regular process on when you'd have a new hire. The other piece of legislation you guys mentioned was around beach access. Nantucket is actually the place I talk about as a model for beach access in the state. But Massachusetts, for people who don't know, have the most restrictive beach access laws in the nation. The only other state that is as restrictive as us is Maine, and that's because we used to own them. We used to have Maine, and so we restrict all activity up to the high water mark to only fishing, paddling, and navigating. This is just a simple change to add in recreation up to the high water mark. A lot of other states have, you can do whatever you want up to the vegetation line. So this is actually a pretty moderate change compared to what a lot of other coastal states have nationally. And it's an issue that I feel really strongly about, having grown up on the Cape and Islands. And I think all of us here are really drawn to the ocean. And I personally believe that no one should have ownership of the ocean, and any sand beneath the ocean should be open and accessible to everyone. This is a bill that hasn't been, it's an idea that's been kicked around before, but hasn't been filed for decades. it currently, it had a hearing and now it got an extension. So it's still alive in the House, and that's something we're going to continue to be advocating for. And we'd love to hear what folks, we love to have Islanders support that as well. But I really point to Nantucket as a model where you guys have just, a culture around sharing ocean access that's a lot stronger than many other communities in our Commonwealth. And I think that's actually a really good model. So I guess I will stop there and just, we can take questions. And I think we got to all the agenda items, but happy to, sound off on anything else. But as always, it's such an honor to represent you guys. And I will say that Nantucket is, you guys are a really well-run town. We interact with many towns across the Cape and Islands, and it's always a pleasure to be with a select board, a town management and leadership team that is on the ball, speaks as one voice, and is really effective in their advocacy. So I really appreciate it. You guys all have my personal cell phone, so I know, and I really appreciate when you guys reach out to me personally with your thoughts and concerns as well. But happy to chat in this public forum too.
Thank you, Dylan. I had one follow up on the steamship stuff. Some constituents have reached out to me asking that they're concerned that it opens it up, and I don't know if it's amendments or something could be tacked on to it that could maybe not be in the best interest of Nantucket. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of Nantucketers. I think that's the concern. Is that a legitimate concern?
Yeah, no. Look, it's just not at all. So we literally opened up the steamship statute 2 years ago, right? And this was at a time during the heart of the pandemic where, and this is actually even more directly, this is a way bigger issue that more directly impacted Nantucket and other port towns, was around the deficits that the towns would have to cover if the steamship operated at a loss. And when we first got the phone call about that loss was around $80 million projected. And so Julian and I quickly passed legislation directly in the Steamship Enabling Act, ensuring that the towns would not have to pay any sort of deficit and that the state would be footing that bill. So we did it very recently. If anything, nothing's going to happen that is not already kind of in the bill or not what the islands want. And in the incredible off chance that did happen, Julian and I would just kill it. We've also have experienced killing bills that we don't like around the steamship as well.
Thank you. I have another follow up, but I think it might be the same thing that Erica has her hand up for.
Sure.
Erica? Maybe.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about the open meeting law bills real quick. I know that the governor just on, what was it, the 15th, signed a new bill that extended the remote participation allowances through July 15th, but is there going to be momentum within the state to make those more permanent?
I would love to know what you guys want, frankly, because I think that, there's competing thoughts on this. I, for one, have seen how incredible it's been on the state house level, especially for Nantucketers, around all of our hearings being accessible via Zoom now, and how that's opened up state house advocacy to people in ways that just, Tucker was flying in on Cape Air to come advocate for housing bank legislation. That's not easy, and now he can do it in his living room with his pajamas on. So it really opens it up for, I'm joking. It really opens it up. And so look, But I also have heard from people that say that, look, town meeting is different. This is a time-honored historic tradition for Massachusetts that we all gather as a community in one communal space and hash out our problems together face to face. So I think it'd be really valuable. I don't know if the board's taken a position on this, but maybe to send something to us that we can use to advocate for it. But I'd really defer to you guys on your preferences, and that's something we're going to be asking all our communities about. Julian, I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I would just suggest, y'all should engage Mass Municipal Association as well, and begin, I think, to really, have a conversation among municipalities about what they want to see going forward. Look, we have a real hard time recruiting people to serve on all the various boards. The select boards are one thing, right? There's a little bit of, there's a lot of work, right? But there's a bit of attention and glamour, and you're able to do big things when you're on the select board, right? Getting people to serve on like the planning board or the cemetery commission, or, I think municipalities have a real incentive to provide some way to get this done. But I just think having municipalities speak with one voice would be helpful here. I do expect, just as a society, we've realized this technology is just so useful, and we're having these debates, even in how we do business. Look, in government, relationships really matter, and I think we have an incentive to be together when we can. But I'd make sure you weigh in with the Mass Municipal Association and others, so that they're also advocating for continued use and flexibility, if that's something you folks would want. I assume it may be, but would defer to you to figure that out.
Erica?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know that Bill 2194 kind of more addresses town meeting, and I personally haven't heard anyone advocating for remote town meeting. I personally love attending town meeting and taking part in that tradition. But with 3152 and 3213 regarding remote participation, I think for us especially, it's just seen as such an invaluable tool, especially because we have a very diverse population with a lot of seasonal people who want to be heard and be able to participate, and this allows them to. So thank you for that.
I don't believe we ever approved town meetings to be virtual either. I think we allowed flexibility around the dates where they could meet outside. We actually allowed some municipalities to meet in sort of a neighboring town. Maybe, you're a small hill town, and, you don't have you don't have a ball field or something. But so I think the town meeting stuff is kind of here to sort of stay, as it is. But I think these other pieces, Erica, that's not only do we need to hear from you, but we got to get Mass Municipal Association and other entities like that. Even the various associations like the Board of Health Association and all those kind of various entities, if they start kind of singing with one voice on this, it's going to force us to act. And I expect we will. Who knows? Who knows what COVID's going to throw at us? So I expect we're not going to just be able to walk away on July 15th and not address this issue further.
Julie,
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Erica. We'll definitely try to reach out to MMA and some others. It's been a game changer really for us for participation and people joining commissions. We have over 40 here, and we need, maybe for elected boards, maybe you have to be hybrid or in person. Maybe there's a happy medium there, but things like the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, to get people to attend to that, it needs to be able to be remote. So it could be local control. Sorry, Christy.
Thank you. I was just going to add what Erica touched on, that we have a very high seasonal population that's really been able to participate during COVID. And that's something that we weren't able to see in the winter months, pre-COVID. So this has really been a great tool in engaging all of our community, homeowners and renters, seasonal and year round. And so it's something that I'd really like to see stay, and something that, if we need a letter to send up, that's something that I would help kind of push through with the board. I also had a second question related to the housing bills. And that's also kind of, what can we do to help support you guys in pushing this forward? Because I don't want to see this momentum get lost. If it doesn't get passed in the next 5 months, as Julian Sear had mentioned, how can we keep the momentum going if we need to?
I would say partnership and coalition is really important. The cross-pollination, Tucker, that you've been leading with Martha's Vineyard, I think has been helpful. But there's what worries me a little bit about all these kind of various home rules that we have out and all these sort of various bills is that we've got a lot of kind of different kind of players sort of pushing for this, and some of that, overall that's really good, right? But what's sort of driving the pressure strategy on this? I think any further opportunities to continue that kind of collaborative approach is really important. If it's just Nantucket asking for something, that's sort of notable, right? But we need to make the argument that like we have such a housing crisis from places as diverse as Boston to Nantucket to Western Mass, right? And make that case. And so, Tucker, you've been doing incredible work on this. So I'm sure that's already happening. But that's going to make the difference, I would say, in these, whether this gets done in these next 5 months or if this is something that holds over to the next session.
Thank you. Okay, if I have a couple hands up in the crowd, ask a couple questions. Thumbs up. We go to Mary Longacre. We're going to try to be quick here and just ask a question and not give comments so we can move on to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Jason. Mary Longacre. Speaking to Senator Sear and Representative Fernandez, first, thank you for the compliments to the Select Board. I appreciate their service as well. Also noting Senator Sear saying that it's difficult to recruit people to serve on boards. That's why I don't understand the provision in the Steamship bill for term limits on the representatives. It seems like you're taking the power away from the Select Board, who can remove a representative every 3 years. And you're saying that we're not going to let you keep somebody who's doing a good job. I really hope that that provision will be removed from the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Was there anything else like COVID related that might go through, like liquor sales for takeout that might get extended or anything like that that might continue on down the road?
I do expect we'll take action on the outdoor dining piece again. I believe outdoor dining expires in April and then cocktails to go expires in May. My sense is that that the outdoor dining has been the most sort of important piece for businesses. I've heard less about cocktails to go. My sense, the Senate actually in a supplemental budget, we actually included those provisions. The House has included it in other provisions as well. So both chambers have basically indicated they support this issue. I expect it's going to get done. I think we're going to actually take up a supplemental budget in March. That will take up a sub budget in March, and I expect that'll be resolved or be extended. We're going to be in this awkward period, right? Where like we're sort of extending these things because of COVID. We have to come to a point where we're like, wait, as a society, we just think this makes sense. Whether it's additional flexibility with outdoor dining to like remote participation and municipal work and everything sort of in between. So I think this will be an exciting period for us to sort of figure out how we, take some of the silver linings out of COVID, right, which have been few but are notable, and how to continue that.
Thank you, Senator Sear and Representative Fernandez. Appreciate your time and all the work you do for this little island 26 miles out to sea.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Libby, any other announcements?
Nope.
I think we had no select board meeting on Wednesday, March 2nd.
Yep.
The next meeting is on March 9th, I think. Select board announcements, comments, anything to get started with? Christy, Don, Matt? No? Okay. There's no follow-up comment from prior select board meetings. Public comment for things not on the agenda. I did get some emails today asking if there'll be any public comment during the select board's reports and comments on short-term rentals. It's not a public hearing, but I will allow some comment. It's going to at first allow select board to talk to Andrew Voris and John Giorgio and to each other. They haven't had a chance to talk about this yet. And then after we talk for a little bit, I'll open it up to the public at a limited basis. So I just want to let everybody know that. And so for public comment, things not on the agenda, can we go to Megan Perry?
Hi, Jason. Thank you very much. I was just calling in with some questions that I've had that I've sent to a couple different boards and commissions, and I'm still kind of waiting for a reply. So I figured I'd ask it public comment. I'm sure you probably can't give me an answer tonight, but maybe follow up later, if that's okay.
Yes,
Is that
please go
okay
ahead.
to ask? Okay. It pertains to the artificial turf fields. And my first question, I think, would be for select board. Because the town's entered into the multi-district litigation against the PFAS industry, has anybody in the leadership considered the unintended consequences of participating in the MDL against the same industry the town is now looking to install turf fields with? Could this position the town poorly? Has anybody asked the MDL attorneys? Not necessarily KP Law, because they're, in this instance, not really representing, it would be the MDL attorneys. So I was just curious if anybody's looked into that. My other question would be, I don't know if this is customary, but are hired consultants normally listed as committee members? And if they are committee members, are they active voting members? Is that a conflict, because they would obviously be benefiting from a project moving forward, especially if they're able to vote on it? I don't know how that works. And then if you look at the product specifications, based on the data available, my understanding is that it doesn't meet the contract. So would that then void the contract for the product? And I'm also wondering, I've asked a number of people this, based on the data on the school's website, the product is able to leach 12 parts per trillion per year. I keep hearing this is an inert, non-soluble chemical. I don't understand how it's able to leach 12 parts per trillion per year, if that's actually the case. And my last question is, based on the Alpha Analytics information on the website, it says things like inappropriate container use, sample couldn't be read. Do we know that the soil samples were collected correctly? Because I'm confused if they were, why inappropriate containers were used, stuff like that. I'm just curious if we know how things were collected for the PFAS sampling, since that's a very specific process. And I know those are questions that are long and probably can't be answered tonight, but I was just curious if anybody could try to get back to me on it. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, see no other public comment. We will move on to COVID-19 update, Public Health Department. Jericho.
Hello, everybody. Reporting to you live from the trailer as we just wrapped up our sign-up session. Very quiet here, as is the case locally for COVID as well. Case counts, 7-day rolling averages of the last estimation were at or just above 5%, which is the lowest we've seen since June, I believe. Our most recent wastewater test is pretty promising, continuing a slower rate of drop off in concentration than we anticipated, but still a negative downward slide. So we are currently in the best situation we have been in COVID since immediately before the P-Town outbreak. So let's all keep that in mind, shall we? Next, we can anticipate it to be pretty flat and stable for the next 2 to 3 weeks. We will then see a spike after the holidays, and we will see another spike after the spring break. So let's all keep that in mind as well. Other than that, we are looking pretty good. Hospitalizations are down to a single one at last check. We haven't had any medevacs for COVID-related stuff in quite a while. Our highest hospitalization rates over the course of the Omicron spread is pretty, I think was 6 at one time. And other than that, we're in pretty solid shape. Things to be concerned about in the coming weeks and months is Omicron has its own variant now. Omicron is AB1. There is a variant of Omicron called AB2, which reinfects individuals who have gotten AB1. So even if you've gotten Omicron, there's a fair chance you might be able to pick up its first variant. That's basically it in terms of case numbers. I'm not up to date on changes of masking regulations for schools and for early childhood education. My personal feeling on that is it makes zero sense to take masks off immediately coming back from vacation. But other than that, we seem to be in as good shape as we have been since last June.
Thank you, Jericho. Anything on vaccinations or?
So we have now, there is a next pediatric dose vaccination clinic will be held on 3/19 at the school, in the same location as the previous one from past weekend was. We are now going to be doing at least once a month with a large state clinic. We'll have the online sign-up forms available for that. Our homegrown vaccination process, we have about 3 more clinics before we transfer fully over to the state, and then we just go straight to homebounds or other unusual cases. Our current demand, at least at our clinic, is fairly low. I think the greatest demand is pediatrics. I believe I heard a number from this school nurse at the public school, putting it to be about 30 to 35% of the 5 to 11-year-olds in her care have been vaccinated. I think the wait and see approach on that front is kind of moving along. We do anticipate a pretty big demand for that, as well as a demand ahead of any H-1B or J-1 visa holders when they arrive in a couple of months. So we should have the state vaccination clinics handling the bulk of pediatric doses, as well as boosters for seconds and thirds for anyone else who is eligible for a vaccine. And then we'll have the capacity to flex out our vaccination immediately ahead of the season as we get new workforce on the island.
Thank you. Any questions for Jericho from the board? Okay. Anything else, Jericho? Is that it?
That's basically it on the COVID front, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Okay. There's no new business that I know of. Is there approval of minutes for February 16th, payroll warrants and treasury warrants?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor by roll call. Don?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes unanimously, 4-0. Approval of pending contracts. Questions or comments from you, Libby, or from the board? Okay, is there a motion?
Approval.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, Matt?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
And Jason Bridges, aye. So that's 4-0. Consent items. We have a gift acceptance, natural resources department. We're going to try to kind of review the gift acceptances a little further than just flying through them because they're so nice. But this one's a kind of a big one. So I didn't know if Jeff Carlson wanted to just review it for us.
Sure. So I apologize. I'm on my phone this evening. I had another obligation that I just stepped out for. But we've been the lucky recipients, the Great Harbor Yacht Club Foundation, who we've been doing a bit of work with. We did a base call up at Eelgrass Survey on the harbor with their foundation. And they just continue with their generosity and offering ways to help. We've been talking about things that are happening in the harbor and things that we need to contribute and do more for. And we've been really looking at ways to step into the ponds to do, phytoplankton monitoring and algal monitoring and those things. It's a really time-consuming process for us. It takes a significant amount of time. And we were able to find, through their scientific review panel, this flow cam, which takes our sampling time and monitoring time from about 2 hours per sample to go through and count cells to under 6 minutes and put it in a digital format where we can share photos with other agencies and things. Puts it right into Excel spreadsheets for us to monitor data over and do trends long term. And do it all pretty effectively. And they were happy to cover 100% of the cost for us. So we thought it was a real win for everybody. And that's what brings us here tonight. So I'm happy to take any questions that you guys may have, but we're really looking forward to it and really thank them for their generosity and participating in our programs. It's been really, really wonderful.
Thank you, Jeff, for that overview. Any questions for Jeff or a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay. So we will approve the gifts designated and then a thanks to the donor, the Great Harbor Yacht Club. All those in favor, Don?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes. Thank you, Jeff.
And
All
it
right,
was
thank you
very
guys so much
generous
for the
of
time.
them.
Okay, on a Citizen Department Committee request, we have Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce. Amy, you gonna walk us through this?
Yes, thank you so much. We're back talking about, I think, the very last thing I talked about at our last in-person meeting in 2020, which is Daffodil Weekend. So we have two things to approve, review, and approve tonight. Excuse me. And I have some additional comments to make. First, as we know, we do every year for this, since the parade itself takes place on a state highway, the board just needs to sign off on the request and approval to send to Mass DOT approving the parade route, which is on a milestone, a state highway. Secondly, we do a request for a waiver of Chapter 54, alcoholic beverages of the Code of Town of Nantucket for the Daffodil Festival tailgate picnic in Sconset, which allows for consumption of alcoholic beverages on public property for that picnic. If I may, a couple things. Back in 2020, we had approved 20 additional vehicles, which includes an additional closed street. That's a little too much to manage at this point. So we've gone back to the number of 110 vehicles, which we had done back in 2015, 2016. So that's the number of vehicles. A couple things I want to mention, as we talked about in 2020, to go back to what some issues we had been dealing with in Sconset. I believe that had been brought up by the board. Again, we have Chantal here, I think, and Bianca with the chamber, who are wonderful to work with. And this is going to be their first year running this, so we're going to support them as much as we can. But they've been great to work with and understand. We've gone through some of the things we've dealt with in the past and things we want to improve on. Most specifically in Sconset, being that party had gotten a little bit beyond what it really was meant to be. We would like to return it to the community, return it to be a community event, picnics, seeing your neighbors for the first time since winter, you know, what have you, personal picnics. We had come across it becoming a commercial event. We had festivals out there trying to sell tickets or give away things. We had actual event planners bringing in liquor sponsors to give out alcohol and set up bars and have rentals and restaurants running some things. So it got beyond what it's meant to be. In order for us to waive this bylaw, we wish it to return to that community picnics with your neighbors, with your friends, sharing that. I'm sure it'll be a little different with COVID after all that we've gone through, but we hope to return it to that. In addition, we addressed a couple of things that we've had issues with in the past, meaning trash, restrooms. Those things are being increased thanks to the chamber. They're going to have some dumpsters out there instead of just trash cans, which will help greatly and keep the route and everything clean. And we ask the community to help with that as well. So one other thing I like to get to as well, I think they're going to increase volunteers. One thing I want to address too, I know we've addressed with the POPs, is understanding that we are still struggling with staff and public safety staff and police officers across the board. That, you know, this requires 11 different spots that require a police detail. We're closing a lot of streets, having a lot of issues where, you know, vehicles are involved and pedestrians and such. And that at this point, this is a school vacation week. I don't know. This is a voluntary detail for police officers. We rely on them for volunteering to take on these details. So I want to, you know, just say we're still struggling with this, similar to we've talked about with the POPs and other events. So we are going to do our very best, but I just want to make sure it's clear that we are still struggling and losing people. Right? Every time I look up, someone's leaving the island. So please understand that we are doing the very best that we can, but it's going to be day by day to see if that's something we can completely fill. So
Amy, you're looking for approval of A and B, but also in your recommendations in the agenda item to approve also the following the conditions that you listed in there. So the motion would be twofold, A and B,
correct.
And then all the conditions.
Correct.
Okay.
And any questions, and certainly the chamber's here too as well. They certainly have, and I'm sorry, I'm the black cloud sometimes and say everything that's negative. They have certainly positive things to talk about and additional activities, children's beach, and Main Street as well, and have done a good job with that as well. So certainly any questions for them, they are here as well too.
Thank you. Select Board, any questions or comments? Matt?
Yeah, so Amy, what if there aren't enough staff? Like, you're sort of warning us and we're approving something, but how can we approve something if we're sort of being told we might not have staff for it?
Well, I am just somewhat, it's not sounding the alarm. We've been sounding the alarm for a while now. I think it's just something important to state. We're going to do the very best we can and find solutions where we can. But that's just something we're going to have to deal with as it comes and try to help the chamber as best we can. I just don't want it to not be said until the very end when we have a trouble. I just already see it being a struggle. And this is also school vacation week that this hits on. So that just makes it a little bit more difficult. It's, again, I try not to speak too much for the police department itself, but I understand this to be an issue right now. And I don't want it to be, a shock at that point. So we will keep everyone informed as we go along.
Matt?
Right, but and here's my concern is if it is, if we get close and there aren't people available, what is plan B? Are we going to be telling the chamber at the last minute that they have to find their own, police, or are we going to be deputizing private citizens, or what is the plan? No, I'm just.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
No, you don't want me to have a gun. I know that, but.
Yeah, no. I don't want to go down that route. I think, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but I'm just saying, it sounds like you want to say there's, we may have to, have a plan B. What is it and when do we know about it? That's sort of.
Yep, and that's something. Direct. Yeah, no, absolutely, and you should, and I am being somewhat as well. I just, didn't want to sit on anything and understand that it's something that we have to work on for everything. And, it certainly wasn't, a lot of folks thought it was directed at one or two events. It's just, it's going to be something we have to have a challenge for and deal with. So I will provide that as soon as I possibly can.
Thank you, Amy. Can we go to Chantal Boyce Murphy? Hi, Chantal.
Hi, thank you so much. I think I want to stress that Amy and Marina and the rest of her team, we've been working so closely together on all of this that she's been very vocal and clear about the fact that there, as we all know, is a staffing issue, and indeed the safety departments are also struggling with it. So we're prepared in the event that if we can't get the details that we need to make all of the events a success, that we're prepared to scale it back significantly. The last thing we want to do is be a stressor on any more resources than we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Christy, Dawn? Christy, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I'm happy to see that an event is being planned and put together. It's been a long couple of years, and so this will be a nice kickoff to spring. And if there's no other questions, I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor? Christy?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jason, aye. So that was for A and B and all the conditions set in the recommendation. Is that correct?
Correct. Thank you.
One
Matt?
quick comment, Jason. I'm happy to see we're scaling back some of the alcohol and some of the drinking that was necessary. And I'd like to think that we're going to do more of that. If we have less drinking, we're going to need, less police and less oversight. There's more good behavior. So I think I'm glad to see that we're tackling it from a couple angles. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you, Bianca, for being here. Maybe you're staying on for the next one. I don't know. Maybe. Okay. Do you want to go on the next one, Amy? The semester.
Yes. So bear with me just 1 second. So the next one is for a filming permit. And we've seen this over the years, a semester cinema request regarding Lost Nation film production scheduled to take place on Nantucket between March the 14th and April the 8th. We're going to be discussing 3 things for this permit: permission to film on town-owned property, approval of various street and sidewalk blockings. I think it's 3 different waivers of town noise bylaw for multiple dates and locations. would like to say that I'm the talking head tonight, that our staff member Marina, who is here tonight, along with the team with the film, and Erica Mooney, did all the heavy lifting on this. Did a lot of heavy lifting on this. There's a lot of work that goes in this, and details and streets, and Erica understanding when there's house moves, when they're closing streets, parking. There is a lot. Filming has a huge impact. So I very much would like to recognize the work that they do to go through this. There's a lot of staff work for these. And it's a very detailed in your packet. I think I try not to get into the weeds, so please ask any questions. Again, this is a program that's been going on for several years. Jay Craven is professor. Forgive me if I'm wrong, this is Vermont. Kingdom County Productions puts together this program where there are, I believe, 40 students from different colleges that come here and produce a movie from start to finish. And we've done this over the years. They have, I think, about 20 professionals that kind of are their mentors and put them through this process. So they are asking for a few of these different permits. Most days of these 20 days they're filming are on private properties. They've asked for 3 noise waivers that are included in the packet. I don't know if we have to pull those up again, as well as some no parking and the actual film permit. Now, for the noise waivers that they're asking to film near some residential areas until midnight is not a loud noise music type of situation. The impact will most likely be lighting, voices, and moving of equipment. Also part of your packet is just a discussion of all the different locations they're going to have. Thank you so much. Marina also put together a very extensive code of conduct and terms and conditions for this film permit that goes along with a lot of other cities that do this. They have several locations that are going to have some no parking signs that are going to be issued on Main Street in India between Center and Federal. They have to coordinate with police on any towing or anything that needs to be done. They also have some incidences where they have to work with the fire department on some open flames and things of that sort, which they have been doing as well. A couple things we need to say when we talk about film permits. Every single time that we've had a film here, as films do, we've had films go off and do what they want to do, or shut down a street because they suddenly need a shot. Block businesses, things of that sort. And the one thing we want to make sure that we're clear about in this case is that this is not a film studio. This is not a college campus. It's a community with businesses and needs of those people will come before this film at every place that needs to happen. So what we're going to ask for in the conditions, in addition, I think Marina outlined very extensively that any changes to what has been submitted must be communicated to us in a timely fashion. Anything that's done outside of this on public property or that impacts any resident or business in a negative manner, the film permit will be revoked due to that. And we've just had too many experiences over the years, not just this crew, but again, this is a new crew every time because it's new students. It can be a huge impact, even though it is off season. If anything comes up, such as a house move that they need to move, they will need to move. So I just want to be, again, very clear on that with all these details, that the answer that, oh, it's a film, it's fluid, is not going to work. We just need to be communicated with throughout and responsive. So I'll stop talking, see if there's any specific questions on these areas.
It seems very thorough to me. I have no problem with it. I remember years ago, Amy, this was a problem. We had multiple movies, and I feel like we've learned a lot. And with you and Erica and everybody on top of it, I feel comfortable moving forward. I don't know if the board has any comments or questions. Christy, then Matt.
Just one question: if you received any pushback from neighbors. I saw that they would be shooting outside the oldest house. I know there's a lot of pushback this summer, so I just wanted to check on that.
Correct. And we had that discussion today, and I know Marina's working them on a butter notification and what that means. The oldest house, as we remembered, is owned by the NHA. And so they are responsible for doing that. Anytime that they rent that out or have any sort of issue there that they need to do that. I think a response of, well, a lot of people are away this time of year is not one I want to hear, because I do know one who is there, and that's all it takes. And they need to be notified. So that is very much a part of the terms and conditions that we've asked for there to be notification and to be told of that notification that needs to happen. And so that is, Marina's highly aware of that and has worked with them on that as well. So yes,
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I feel comfortable on that, Christy, because it's March 14th, April 8th. It's a short amount of time and not all summer, but great question. Matt?
Yeah, I'm assuming we're recommending this and that they have not been, that the issues have been straightened out and there weren't a lot of them, correct? And so what I'm thinking about with some of this for us as a board to be, going forward, the staffing situations and these other things, they're not going to clear themselves, I don't think, in the next few years. So I think the marching orders we should be giving all these events and all these people is be on your best behavior or you won't be approved next year. I mean, I don't want to get in a situation where we're overwhelmed and, and the police are coming to us or the fire is coming to us, in June telling us to cancel everybody.
Right.
People have to realize that they have to take some, a lot of responsibility for this. And I think, so anyway, at some point that should be the message I think we get across. Otherwise, we'll be saying no next year because we won't have any choice.
Correct. If I may respond, yeah, correct. And I think what we've done, and on us too as well, a lot of us in staffing, whether it be police, fire, licensing, took on a lot of things and just did them over the years and we're enablers in this sense. So what we've done a lot of is really put some responsibility on all these folks. A license is a privilege, not a right, and that comes with conditions. So they have been pushed to be responsible for a lot more of this, more detail, more responsibility and sign off. So absolutely, that's something, a lot of this had been done over the years. So they just, came and it's going to be done and it's just a permit. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a struggle in that sense. But a lot of responsibility has been put on every applicant, whether it's an event or film on this, because it does take an extraordinary amount of time to go through these details. There's things like parking places that they're going to take and things of that sort that can't be abused. In the past, they've blocked a restaurant call because people couldn't get into the restaurant, or parking, no parking signs were being used inappropriately, or they were putting out cones, or, trucks would get in the way. Filming, it's film. It does happen. But again, this is a community and the community needs will come first. So I think Marina was very clear with that in her code of conduct, and I feel comfortable with that.
Thank you, Amy. Any other questions? If not, is there a motion for A, B, and C and the stipulations that's in our packet, staff recommendations?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Matt. All those in favor? Don?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Christy?
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you very much.
Erica and everybody who worked on this. And thank you for everyone from who's here from semester.
Thank you.
Okay, real estate matters. Ken, you taking this one? You and Vicky?
I think Ken's going to take the lead.
Okay. Ken, you're muted. Vicky, you might have to take the lead here. Who knows?
The first thing before you is the purchase and sale agreement for 10-12 Washington Street. We have been working with the Greenhound to purchase the property from them. This is a great property that they have agreed to sell to the town, and we're going to be using it for transportation purposes primarily, and general municipal purposes. There are also going to be two tenants in the property. The food pantry is going to continue to occupy the property, as well as the bus service is also going to be occupying the property and leasing that. And they're going to be staying there until they find other locations for their sites over the term of years. Sooner with the food pantry than with the bus services. But so this agreement is really here for you to review and approve. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
And I've been able to figure out how to unmute.
All right, Ken. Well, she just did it for you. So this is a purchase to sale for the Greenhound building, which is contingent on town meeting appropriations. Any questions?
That is correct.
Yep. Matt?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor? Matt?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes unanimously 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now on to the public hearings. This is, we'll open the public hearing to consider the taking of easements and portions of Hancock Street. Ken, you and Vicky?
Yep. At the town meeting last year, we authorized the taking of a portion of Hancock Street, which in fact is an easement across a person's property. And I think, Erica, if you have that map, that would be helpful just to show that it runs across a piece of property and is totally within the borderline of the property. So the object of the exercise is for us to be able to take the easement, then go back to REAC and determine the appropriate price for conveying the easement to the people whose property it is on. So this is the first step of the process of first taking the easement and then going back to REAC, making a determination as to what the price should be to, in fact, dispose of it to the people whose property the easement is on. So Vicky has drafted all of the documentation with respect to it, and it is a recommendation that you move forward to approve this. This is one of the so-called paper streets that have existed a period of time and to clear up title and use for the area.
Thank you, Ken. This is a public hearing. I don't see any hands up. I will need a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Matt?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Jason, aye. That closes the public hearing. Pleasure of the board.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor? Christie?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes 4-0. And we have another public hearing to consider the taking of portions of Cherry Street.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This again is a paper street that goes a single block, as you can see on the map that's out there. And the idea is to take it and then have it go back to REAC to, in fact, convey it to the abutters on each side of the street. As per the legislation, we have, in fact, given notification to any of the abutters within the appropriate range. I've had calls from two abutters who just wanted an explanation of what was going, but they were very supportive of it, indicating that they thought this was an appropriate thing to do. And as a result, it would be our recommendation to you to, in fact, approve this. This has been reviewed at REAC and was unanimously approved, their recommendation to you to proceed with respect to the taking. And then we will come back to you with a recommendation as to the disposition. Thank you.
Vicky?
I just want to add one other thing about to Ken's explanation of the taking here, and that is that this ultimately is going to be conveyed back to each of the abutters. A portion of it, parcels A and B, will be conveyed back to the abutters, but it's also going to be subject to an emergency access easement, so that the town ultimately will be able to get access out. Right now it abuts another parcel of property, but the goal with the planning department is that they're going to get out to South Shore Road so that it could then enable emergency vehicles to access through there.
Yeah.
So that was one of the driving forces behind this as well.
Thank you, Vicky. This is a public hearing. Any comments? Okay, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, Matt,
Aye.
Christie,
Aye.
Don,
Aye.
and that's a aye for me. That's 4-0. Okay, pleasure of the board.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, Matt,
Aye.
Don,
Aye.
Christie,
Aye.
Jason, aye. That passes 4-0. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, town managers report.
Thank you. First off, we've got second quarter budget reports for fiscal 2022. It seems there's been a bit of a miscommunication about our Island Home Enterprise Fund, so we will put that off. And the finance director will take us through the general fund and the solid waste enterprise fund. Brian?
Thank you, Libby. I think Erica is going to put the general fund up. Thank you, Erica. If you could scroll down to, let's just go to the next one. No, I'm sorry, back up, my fault. So overall, the second quarter we did very well in the general fund. As you can see, revenues were up about 2.7 million. Expenses are also running pretty much in line with where we'd expect them to be with the end of the second quarter. There was an increase, as noted here, about 8.9 million, which was primarily driven by the fact that the Barnstable County was distributed to everybody, the expense-wise, in the second quarter versus the third quarter last year. If you could keep going, scroll down, Erica. Next slide would be good to highlight the year. So on a year-over-year basis, I think there's a couple things that I want to point out here. Overall, on general fund revenue, we're running about $9 million ahead of where we were last year at this time. We're certainly happy with the performance of the general fund at this point. One thing of note, because I know we get asked this very frequently, local rooms tax for the first 6 months of the year for the period of July to December is $11.3 million, which far outpaces where we ended up last year by almost $4 million on the year-to-date basis through June 30th of last year. These next two quarters are typically not very large quarters because they encompass months that are not as many people visit the island. So we're still waiting to see what the next period looks like. But overall, we're far ahead of where we were last year in terms of rooms and meals tax. And meals tax as well. Most, if not all, of the other revenue sources are running ahead of where they were last year and running ahead of budgeted. So we expect a positive year-end result as well based on these first 6 months of results on the revenue side. Could you scroll down to the 6 month year-over-year? Next one would be good. So for the first 6 months, we are running about $7 million ahead of where we were last year in expenses. But as I noted, the large primary driver of that is the retirement assessment was distributed to not only the general fund, but to the enterprise funds in the second quarter versus the third quarter of last year. So on a year-to-date basis, we're running relatively in line with what we would expect and in line with the budget that was approved at town meeting. Next slide, Erica. Here, as we always do, we list the top 15 capital projects. Some of these are relative to Affordable Housing Trust, which are borrowings that were done. And then we have island-wide roads and infrastructure for 6F for Waite Drive. I will note that we did have a $1.5 million MassWorks grant that has covered the majority of those expenses. And then sidewalk improvements and resiliency planning and Nobody or Fieldhouse is progressing along as well. Next slide, please, Erica. Next one, because we didn't do any major borrowings. Just a little bit about from an investment standpoint, all of the trust funds and stabilization funds on an investment basis are performing very well given the market that we're in right now. So we're happy with those as well. Next slide. And the outlook, which quite honestly right now is mostly green in terms of what we would really be concerned about with building permits and any of the revenue accounts. Most local indicators are not really giving us a lot of pause for concern, although we are seeing, obviously, we're in an inflationary environment right now. We will be going out to market relatively soon for borrowings, and we are expecting that most likely will be priced into a little bit higher interest rate. So we're watching that closely to see how we can manage through that. With that, I'll take any questions from the board that they may have on the general fund through the end of the second quarter, which was ended on December 31st.
Any questions or comments for Brian from the board? No. Okay, thank you, Brian.
Oh, I have one more to do, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, for that one, thank you for that first one.
So Erica, if you wouldn't mind going to the solid waste, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you. Next slide, or next page, please. So from a revenue standpoint, as we noted in the highlights, we're pretty close to the actual amount received last year. So we're fairly comfortable with where we are on the revenue side, not only on a quarterly basis, but on a year-to-date basis. We are experiencing some higher disposal costs due to increased activity. It does also bring in additional revenue, but the costs certainly have been a little bit higher than we've expected. Can you continue to the next slide? Next one. Thank you. Even one more. One more. So on the revenue side, as I noted, tip fees very similar, landfill fees very similar to where we were last year. So on a quarterly basis, we're pretty comfortable with the way the second quarter has turned out. Next slide. Year-to-date basis, as I noted, since we do have experienced some higher tip fees, disposal costs, that also does bring in some increased tip fees. So we are running about $200,000 ahead of where we were last year. So we do believe, based on this analysis here, that we should end in a fairly positive note in solid waste, but it's something that we are certainly monitoring as we go forward to make sure that that revenue continues to stay at the levels we think it's going to. Next slide. So for the quarter, as I noted, again, we had about $700,000 more in collection and disposal fees, which is consistent with the increased utilization. Overall, up about $654,000 for the quarter. There was a decrease in the amount of freight that we shipped off the island, so that did account for bringing that down. That overall increase in the budget down a little bit. Next slide. And on a year-to-date basis, we are up about $275,000 due to those increased costs, but we are running slightly ahead in terms of the revenue. So as we look at this, we're cautiously optimistic that we won't need a transfer at town meeting to cover any shortfalls, but it's something that we've been looking at very closely the last couple of months to ensure that that will end on a positive note for solid waste. Next slide. And I think with that, I certainly am available to answer any questions the board might have about solid waste as well.
Any questions from the board? Seeing no. Okay, thank you, Brian, for that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we did have one hand up, so if you could stay on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't see that. From Lindsay Hoffman. Sorry, I didn't see that hand up. Go ahead, Lindsay, if you can unmute. You're all set up to speak, if you can hear me. I'll give her a couple more seconds here. Okay. Maybe we'll try this again, Erica. And if send them back in attendees. If they raise their hand again, maybe we can try it again.
Keep going.
Yeah, I've seen if the hand was going to pop back up. Yeah, go ahead, Libby.
Okay, next up, we've got review of revisions to the committee handbook. Pursuant to the board's revision of the committee appointment policy, the state's remote meeting participation allowance, and some other issues that have arisen since the most recent edition of the committee handbook, we've revised it and updated it. There's a summary of what we've done here, shown here. And we've been also having some internal discussion about how the committee handbook and other associated documents get conveyed to new committee members and perhaps even existing committee members. And Maureen Coleman in our office, in association with Erica, came up with a great idea, which is to put the entire committee handbook plus associated documents onto a QR code that can be provided to people who go to get sworn in the town clerk's office, so they can have all of that at their fingertips as needed. So we are having Florencia work on that. And I would thank Greg, Erica, and Maureen for working so hard on this. In going through it, as you always go through documents, you notice things that need to be updated that you didn't notice before. So a lot of that was cleaned up as well. And that's about it. Happy to answer questions about it.
Thank you, Libby. I think we talked a little bit today in our agenda meeting, and a little bit, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, about our electronic policies of receiving text and doing things during meetings. And I got an email from constituents who are concerned about that, and I think we can educate and have Lauren Goldberg or somebody from KP Law to come in or whoever to do trainings for all committees and boards, elected officials and volunteers. So I understand that better.
We're definitely going to be working on scheduling the conflict of interest training, open meeting law training, and we can certainly add our policies in there that relate to those things.
Thank you. Any questions from the board on that? Comments?
What is, you said a rolling meeting or rolling committee? What was that? What do you mean by that?
Do you have an answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
A rolling meeting is when you don't have a meeting altogether, but you're having conversations with each board member individually. So it's this rolling conversation between individual members. And it's a way that some people think that they can get around the open meeting law, but you're actually violating it by doing
Yeah, you can. All right. That makes sense.
John, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the Division of Open Government and the regulations refer to that as serial discussions.
That's the way I've heard it, serial.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guess that's it on that item. It seems like sort of a letdown because we spent like a whole lot of time on it. All right, the monthly town management activities report, as normally I do, I typically only go through the items that we've been most recently working on. And they are shown here in bold. So with regard to plans, reports, and studies, obviously the board has endorsed the coastal resiliency plan. And now it's time to figure out next steps with how that plan is going to be implemented. So we have a 2-day design thinking workshop coming up with Arcadis. It's scheduled for March 7th and 8th. It is not a public workshop. It is specifically for members of boards, regulatory and otherwise, that are going to have specific roles in the projects that are going to come out of the plan. And this is meant to have sort of deep discussions about what is going to be prioritized, how we are prioritizing things, how we are going to fund them, all of that sort of thing. We had a prep meeting today to go over how it's going to go. The strategic plan, the next long-term planning workshop so you had as part of the strategic plan, we had a solid waste long-term planning workshop on February 7th. We're working on when we're going to plan the next one. And we need to work on the next strategic plan update. We are working on something we're calling the State of the Town update. We're hoping to get that out to you, presented to you prior to town meeting. And we're working with Julia Novak to pull that together. The Nantucket Water Quality Improvement Plan, we're having some staff discussions following up on the board's February 2nd discussion about that project. Baxter Road long-term planning, I think you know that we have relocation planning efforts underway. We've had some meetings with property owners, and we have regular internal meetings scheduled on this. It is obviously significant staff time going into that. PFAS, townwide risk assessment, lots of activity going on this. There are meetings weekly. And we're working on scheduling the next public informational session after further information is given to us by the Department of Environmental Protection. With respect to meetings, scroll down a bit, Erica, please. We've got obviously prep for the 2022 annual town meeting. I'm starting to work with departments on narratives for the debt exclusions and getting around to various groups to explain them. We have that underway with our Island Home. Lots of work going on there. FinCom is continuing to meet. They are wrapping up their motions. DPW, we were having weekly DPW operations meetings. Those are now moved to monthly since we have the director here and he and I are meeting weekly. Stormwater with Children's Beach is still underway with internal discussion as to how we're going to tackle that. The Behavioral Health Steering Committee is continuing to meet on a regular basis. Island Home, we're meeting with the administrator on a regular basis as well to try to, keep things on track. And they were doing, we haven't had the annual, although it hasn't been so annual lately, state survey yet. But they were doing a mock survey yesterday and today. So that was going well, I think. SBPF is obviously taking some time as well. We had a workshop meeting with Concom last week to discuss the potential, to discuss the notice of intent and what all is being prepared for that with the Concom and our consultant. We have a supply chain project that is undergoing some revisions with the Army Corps of Engineers, and it seems like that project at this point is a little bit stalled. If there are questions about that, I think if Greg is on, he can maybe address those. Greg and I are going to be attending the ICMA. They are having a regional meeting of Northeast ICMA in Boston, April 6th through 8th. The 6th is a Wednesday, so we will not be in person. We'll have to try out the hybrid model for that meeting. A lot of projects underway. I won't go through all of them. They're listed here. If people have questions, just feel free to ask. Our DEI director is very much engaged with the DEI strategic plan, and there's a lot of activities going on with that. Employee engagement is starting. The classification and compensation study, the HR director and I had an initial meeting with that group last week. Committee handbook, we've mentioned. Housing, town employee housing, lots of activities and meetings and initiatives are being discussed here. We're working on seasonal and potentially year-round employee housing site design at the Fairgrounds Waite Drive site. The HR director and the housing director met with union reps recently about what ideas they might have about housing, and we are actively working on a couple of those things. We are about to send out a survey to all town employees about housing. Unfortunately, our town employee rental housing procurement that we issued a couple of months ago came back with no bids received. As far as procurements that are out go, so sort of some of the bigger ones, that one came back with none. The playing field bid, I think that, I don't know if anything came in on that. Brian, are you on? Did anything come in? Or Greg, do you know?
We received 2 bids yesterday, Libby, and we're evaluating them.
Okay, great. So at least
They're
we got some.
significantly different from each other, so.
Okay. If the board recalls, we issued a bid for playing field maintenance months ago, and it came in at much, much higher than we would have appropriated. So once we had our park and rec manager hired, he went through that bid and streamlined it a bit, and we reissued it. So at least we have a couple of bids to evaluate. The shooting range RFP will be issued shortly. We're continuing to prioritize DPW projects. The potential water main extension west of the airport, this is PFAS related. We are going to be coming to you at your meeting on March 9th with some review of this, because there is a pending state revolving loan fund application that is going to require an appropriation at town meeting before June 30th. We already have an article in. It doesn't have an amount listed in the article. That will need to go in the FinCom motion. So we are going to be reviewing that with you again at your meeting on March 9th. We talked about the state of the town update. I guess I had kind of had that in there twice, the loan, the SRF loan, which I just mentioned. I'm trying to put together a kind of a little mini internal group to review streetlights, downtown streetlights, specifically with respect to repairs and getting them to work, and looking at LED lighting. And we're going to be eventually coming to possibly the board with some recommendations, and we'll be engaging some other stakeholders in that. I've met with the Dark Sky Group representative, and we probably will have some continuing discussion with them about some of these streetlight issues. Some items that have been put on hold due to COVID pandemic, and we all know the pandemic is technically over, but it is still causing delays in many areas. Some of those are listed there, and we're trying to get back to a lot of these things. Personnel, collective bargaining negotiations is continuing for all units. The transportation planner has been filled, which I think you know. DPW director has been filled. We are working to fill the assistant town manager for administration. We have some interviews scheduled or about to be scheduled next week. The fire chief has announced his retirement plans for beginning of September, despite numerous attempts to talk him out of it. Those have met with some amount of failure, and we are going to be presenting to you a search firm contract very shortly. And the collector has announced her retirement in June, so we're going to be looking for that position as well. And this is not an exhaustive list of vacancies. These are just some of the more higher level ones. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Libby. I just had a couple things I don't remember. The Surfside, I guess the third force main and Surfside Road. Remind me of where that is with paving. It's driving down Surfside Road the other day. I couldn't remember where that project is.
That project will start up again in the spring. With the pump station, I think, construction continuing over the summer, but the road will get in better condition very shortly. Erica, did you want to elaborate on that? It looked like you did.
I think you got it. I will just note that we have a multi-project sewer, multi-sewer project meeting tomorrow. And we're going to be talking about the third sewer force main project, the continuation of the Surfside sewer project, as well as the South Shore Road project. And so we'll have a better idea for sure after
that. Okay. And then the compensation study is, we just got a grant for that. And what's the timing? Is that 3 to 6 months? Does that take a while to do?
Yeah, it's probably more like 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
And actually, I don't think you've seen the contract yet, because I think it's with finance right now. It's still with you, Brian?
It's with them for our responses to their requested changes.
Okay.
So, but we are working through it, and as soon as that's finalized, we'll bring it forward.
Okay. Timing wise, we'll have some of that information, the results of that for the next fiscal year process budget.
That's our hope. Yeah.
Yeah, but not really, because it starts in August, the next cycle, right? Or even before, in July.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the board? No. Anything else, Libby?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right, on to select board reports, comments. discussion regarding potential select board comments on Article 39, the bylaw for short-term rentals, and Article 42, zoning short-term rentals. So we put this on the agenda so we can give Christy and Matt and I a chance to discuss this with John Giorgio, with Andrew Vorse. We've not had a discussion about it. We've been able to ask some very clarifying questions, and that's about it. But now that we have Christy back with a quorum, we can talk about it. We have Mr. Visco here, Board of Health Chair. If we have any questions for that. So I really just want, sometimes it's okay to have an agenda item that doesn't need an outcome, right? We just need a chance to talk about things, and this is pretty big and it's really important. We've heard a lot from the planning board, a lot from the finance committee and others, but we haven't really, the public hasn't heard from the select board. So I'd like to do this in two parts. First off, to give Matt, Christy, and I a chance. Oh, Don, go ahead.
I'm just recusing myself.
Okay, thank you, Don. And Melissa's not here tonight. Give us a chance to talk freely to each other, ask questions, and then I'll open it up to if you have any questions for the public. It's not a public hearing, so we don't want to go too long, but I'd like to ask everybody, and I'll probably say this again, to be brief so we can hear from everyone. So I'd like to start it off with, I think we're going to bounce around a lot, but we could start with Article 39 and what you think, Matt, what Christy, if you have any questions. I think in general, maybe not, these articles and this discussion is a defining moment for this community in a lot of different ways. And I think it's important that we talk about it. Just to start it off, to get us going, I think we have to find a way to control the growth of short-term rentals. I personally don't think we need to eliminate them or stop them, but we have to control the growth. And I think we're all trying to figure out how to do that with these two articles and with the citizen warrant article from Mr. Glidden. Matt, you want to start with any thoughts? Instead of just listen to me talk for a while.
Well, no, I mean, I agree with you, Jason. I think it's been portrayed as a noise issue, and certainly there are noise issues. But I think the bigger issue for the community is, do we have a community? We opened tonight with the senator losing his rental and not having a place to live on the Cape. And his discussions, I think, were pretty, it was sort of a leading discussion for tonight because, how much of a community do you have if it's all, estates and rental homes? And I think that, so that's what worries me. And, when we had town meeting, there was discussion of no one's asking for Mid-Island. Well, I own property in Mid-Island. I can assure you they're asking for Mid-Island now. And so, I think I think it's, it's and I want to be assured that the Board of Health is ready, to handle this. I want to, if it's going to go that direction. And I want to, so there's all different aspects to it. So I'm glad we're finally able to talk about it as a board.
Christy, any thoughts?
Just in general, kind of overview thoughts. I think Matt made a really good point listening to Senator Sear. I wrote down the first thing he said is, the next few years, the decisions we make are going to make or break our community. And I think, these articles are really going to make or break kind of what our housing is going to look like in the next couple of years. I'm happy to go into, specific questions or thoughts. I don't know if Matt or you, Jason, have any other questions.
Go ahead, Christy.
I think just kind of one of my, I don't know if I want to say the right word is concerns is I felt that last year kind of Article 90 really started the conversations around short-term rentals, and it really focused on restricting them. And what kind of the community came out at town meetings saying is we don't want to restrict them, full on. And a lot of the conversations at the finance committee and planning board and select board, we all kind of said we want data around how short-term rentals affect the community and affect our housing. We had a lot of questions around kind of what is, quote, the problem of short-term rentals. And I really feel like that still hasn't been addressed. And these articles are a starting point of, trying to kind of put the framework of how we might regulate them. But I still feel like there's a lot of questions in the community of what exactly are we trying to address, and are these articles actually addressing those? And so one of kind of my first questions, and this might be for, is Andrew Vorse on?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, will all rentals be registered, including year round, or is this kind of focused solely on short-term rentals?
This, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This article is focused on short-term rentals only. And as you point out, we have very little actual data. We have basically a list from the state and lots of anecdotal stories, but we do not have, specific information about, and I want to caution on the use of the state data is that includes people who rent for 2 weeks or less. So, and this bylaw is not addressing those people because they don't pay the short-term rental tax, but they do have to register with the state. So, as you said, the rental, at least the Article 39, is the process, the local process, where information is in fact gathered. And could I just, when you think about how right now we have no idea how many people are doing this, have stopped doing it, have decided to do it for the coming season. Even the people that are actually running them are like, if I have a problem, who do I call? Who in the town, handles these specifically? And the answer is there isn't any one group right now. It's depends on the issue, and it depends on what, the specific problem or question is. So.
And just a follow-up on that, was there any discussion around adding year-round rentals to this registry, or something that we might pursue in the future, just to, again, kind of build that data and availability of information as we move forward?
No, this has come up in the past. I was not focused on that. I was focused on the specific short-term rental issue itself. I know the town manager and at least, I don't know if the current Board of Health director or the past have talked about rental registries in the past. But this does not include that at this time.
Okay. The reason I just ask is we'll be able to follow those trends if we also had a year-round registry, if we were able to see, there's been a lot of, again, kind of the talking points of it's affecting year-round housing. And if we could actually see some of these properties going from being year-round rentals to short-term rentals, would have some data to back up some of the conversation. So that was just kind of one of my thoughts that would improve Article 39, or something that we could do in the future to help shape these conversations. You can go, Matt. I have another question.
Oh, then go, if you have a question, go.
It's on Article 42.
Mike, I agree with the data aspect, Christy, and I think that was when we got out of town meeting last year. I pushed to have a committee to get put together, and a joint committee, and start trying to dig some of that out. I didn't prevail in my desire, and that's fine. But I'm looking at it saying, I agree, but my concern, and some of this is legal questions. So my concern is why, if we don't have the data, why are we doing the most, why are we allowing this for all entities, everywhere on the island, any entity can do this? Why are we going to that, and that's, why are we picking that as our starting point and then trying to work backwards? Wouldn't we want to start and work, the other way around? And so, from a, policy standpoint for us, is that the right way to address it, is to let everybody, make it legal everywhere for anyone who wants to do it, any entity, and then try to regulate that? I guess is a John Giorgio question is, and we've asked this, I tried to ask this prior when we couldn't talk about it, but I guess, but now I'm trying to, now we can talk about it a little easier. And, what is the breadth of what we can do through regulation? My understanding is our strongest tool is zoning, and that, Is that, so am I right on that, John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think there's been some misinformation. I'm not sure that's the right word to use about exactly what the town can do through zoning regulations with respect to short-term rentals. And I think it's pretty clear from my standpoint that as a matter of zoning, you can't treat properties differently based upon the form of ownership. I think that's pretty much a bedrock principle of zoning. And I realize we may be going forward a little bit in the order of articles, but the concept behind the zoning bylaw is to recognize the fact that short-term rentals really have become ubiquitous on the island. And we have seen some legal challenges to sort of the traditional situation where a family owns a rental on Nantucket as a second home. And in order to presumably meet the expenses of that ownership, they do short-term rentals during the summer, basically. And that is being challenged now in litigation. The building inspector, my understanding has taken the position that short-term rentals are a permitted accessory use. And so he has denied enforcement action, and that's gone to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They upheld the building inspector, and now we're in litigation. So one of the issues I think you need to concentrate on here is the legal jeopardy that the current situation presents to people who are trying to rent their homes on a short-term rental basis. And so then how do you deal with that, but at the same time come up with a structure that would allow the town to actually regulate the nuisance impacts of short-term rentals? And that's what Article 39 is intended to do. Two things, really. One is to establish this registry so that you can gather the information. You can figure out where the properties are that are being rented on a short-term basis, who owns the properties, and that's going to happen through this registry. The second thing that Article 39 does is to authorize the Board of Health, with the approval of the Select Board, to enact regulations that would address as I said, some of these nuisance conditions. Now, the beauty of doing it through a general bylaw and regulations is there's no grandfathering at that point. Everyone will be subject to the bylaw and the regulations, regardless of whether they have operated in the past. Under zoning, as we know, you are limited because if it is a pre-existing lawful non-conforming use, it can continue. So the thought here was, let's, in the zoning bylaw, recognize, as I said, that these short-term rentals are ubiquitous on the island, but address the regulation of the impacts through the general bylaw and subsidiary regulations. That's the intent here. And I don't know whether, Andrew, whether you have anything more you want to add to that, sort of conceptually, the way we approach this.
No, and I just wanted to read one thing about, again, the ownership, and this is from, an earlier SJC case of the fundamental principle of zoning is that it deals basically with the use without regard to the ownership of the property involved or who may be the operator of the use. And in my discussions with John about this, and his other colleague at the firm, I mean, it was clear that the Act, 334 of the Acts of or 337 of the Acts of 2018 did not amend the Basic Zoning Act in any way. So I think that again underscores that in fact zoning is not the most the most strong way to regulate this. And again, the process of zoning enforcement is much more clunky and difficult than through the general bylaw.
I would also note that under the that chapter 337, the legislature has expressly authorized towns to enact bylaws and has that regulates short-term rentals, where they can be, the number, and so forth. So I think there's a much more flexible avenue through the general bylaws to get control over short-term rentals than there is through zoning. And by the way, that provision has enhanced penalties that the town can impose, including civil penalties. And we've put in the general bylaw a civil penalty of up to $5,000 per violation. So you can really have some significant financial penalties associated with the general bylaw. And that's what we've done here.
Matt?
So John, you're saying through the general bylaw, here's questions. Could we do, if through the general bylaw, could we say no short-term rentals in these areas, to pick an area, in this neighborhood? Is that legal?
So on the face of the statute, it would be, Matt. Obviously, there's going to come a time when bylaws and regulations enacted pursuant to the new statute will most likely be subjected to legal challenge. So with that caveat in mind, I think you can read the statute, and it's section 14 of the short-term rental law, that it's pretty broadly written that you can, it says through a bylaw. It doesn't specify zoning or general, but as Andrew and I are pointing out, you really can't regulate the form of ownership through zoning based upon prior court decisions. So we would have to do that through a general bylaw and regulations. And we may have to, at a subsequent town meeting, once we have this registry in place, we get a real handle on the numbers. We can certainly, the Board of Health is certainly authorized here to enact regulations, but we may come back to you with a recommendation on a more rigorous general bylaw that would regulate the numbers and the location and that kind of thing.
Matt?
Yeah, it might, because it's, and then is it, in one of my concerns, what is happening in the industry now? And I've got a buddy who's doing this. What's happening in the industry now is they have algorithms, they have companies and algorithms that target places like Nantucket that are good investments, and they pool money to buy residences in these places, and they pool large institutional amounts of money. It's huge now, and they target these areas, and they buy up residential homes where you're allowed to use them commercially. And I think that's what it isn't that much now. There's a handful of that happening, but it's sort of what Airbnb did. It's what, Uber has done. It's basically, they're making themselves a disruptive technology on purpose, and their goal is to do that. And so the question, I look forward and say, where are we going to be? Are we better off, and I have my own feelings on this, but, how do we get in, what do we do to get in front of that? Because you sort of said, well, we could do this, but then it might be a problem if it's challenged. Are we better off with the zone, with the zoning stricter and then the bylaw, or are we better off letting anything happen and then doing it the other way around? I tend to think that we're better off with the zoning saying it's, an accessory use and it's pre-existing, but therefore the rest you can't do, than we are the other way around. So And that's my concern, is this is heading a different direction than it even has been prior.
Christine?
Thanks. I have a similar question, I think, Matt, if we're on the same page of if Article 42 moves forward and then at a future town meeting, we did want to restrict short-term rentals, say in certain locations, or, if we wanted to limit investor-owned, is future general bylaws going to be kind of prevented or restricted because of Article 42, or are we kind of comparing apples and oranges? Is the use of it completely separate?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Christie, I do think it's apples and oranges. Even if Article 42 passes in its current form and basically makes short-term rentals allowed as of right, that does not prohibit or preclude the town at a future town meeting from enacting some more specific restrictions. And I want to read to you it's very brief, what the short-term rental law says about bylaws. It says, the town may regulate the existence or location of operators under this section within the city or town, including regulating the class of operators and number of local licenses or permits issued to operators under this section, and the number of days a person may operate and rent out an accommodation in a calendar year. Now, we've already explained that some of the aspects of this you can't do through zoning based upon case law, but we would certainly move forward with a general bylaw based upon the very broad language in the enabling legislation. And there's no grandfathering at that point.
Christine?
I think that's helpful. I think what I personally feel and what I've heard from the community is, this has been a part of our community, short-term rentals. We've always had those rentals, in Nantucket and Sconset, and, it is moving kind of more around the island due to Airbnb and others. And, something that I would like to see is this kind of stop of can you hear me still?
Yep, go ahead. We can hear you.
The commercialization of short-term rentals on the island. And, I don't know if anybody else saw the Nantucket Current article this morning, but I was shocked to see that the Richmond property, which was workforce housing, had the ability to short-term rent for those home ownership. For the last several years, I always thought that those were limited. And so I was happy to see in Article 42 that, future special permits could have the ability to limit short-term rentals. And I think that's something that, when this was approved in 2015 or 2017, we weren't thinking about short-term rentals because it wasn't in our face. And I think that's something that we're going to want to use in the future because, workforce housing that's selling for $2 million for a lot or for a house is not something that, businesses are going to be able to afford. And, even if this transfer fee gets passed at the state, the town is not going to be able to use funds to compete with these investors at that price range. And so, I think we're kind of going off on a tangent, but we're running out of time to really preserve some of these spaces for workforce housing if we're turning everything into investor-owned short-term rentals. And so I'd hope that by the time we have a next town meeting, that we have some clearer articles to move forward, whether those are general bylaws, to either look at something similar to Boston, where you can restrict investor-owned, or for people who own multiple properties across the island. But that's something that I didn't see in either of those articles. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. I have a question for John. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. If you want to comment on that, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that, what Article 42, it's really setting a baseline where there really isn't one right now. Right now, there's sort of an endless argument about, and it's basically on the slender reed of the building inspector and the ZBA determinations at this point. So, the intent of 42 is to set that baseline that that uses where people have already been doing this, that are doing it at the time, that would be the critical date. And then as bylaws are proposed in the future, again, that the establishment date is set by that vote. So.
Thank you, Andrew. Matt?
So Andrew, if we're picking a date and people who are doing it as of that date can do it, but if everyone's allowed to do it anywhere, can anyone do it at any time?
As of now, yes, that's exactly what happens right now. And we have, from, the information that we provided to you, I mean, it ranges in the different zoning districts, for example. There's 5 districts where there's currently none, at least on the state list, generally the industrial districts, things like that. There's an average of about 12.2 across the board, and 12 districts are less than that, and then 9 districts are over that. So again, that information is not really solid. I think after there's an opportunity to have them registered, we would take a look, and perhaps there's a limit that is set in either individual districts or groups of districts where whatever the number might be, that there can't be any more than a certain percentage of units in that district that are in short-term rental use. You see what I'm saying? So it's almost like there might be areas where you would no longer qualify if the area is saturated with short-term rentals, depending on how that's defined. I mean, obviously have to, sit down and go over this and make sure that these regulations are, solid and based on criteria, because they will be reviewed by the Attorney General and others. So, but I believe that's certainly part of what can be considered under the act. And John, let me know if I'm wrong here, but it does say under chapter 337 that the numbers and the class of them can be part of the regulation.
That's correct.
Follow up for John. Say at some point we wanted to say that you could rent short term anywhere on the island, but you had to live on the property, not necessarily in that house, but on the property for longer than you rented for any calendar year. So is that something we could legally do?
It's so the statute says including regulating the class of operators. And I would say that would be regulating the class of operators, Matt.
Right.
So as long as
So that's something we could, because that would get to the heart of it. It would allow the summer homeowners to do it as long as they spent some time here, and it would allow the islanders who want to do it, but it would exclude people who are buying them up as mini hotels and as a business enterprise. So that, to me, something along those lines, and this is and I'm not sure, I don't know what you've looked at, Andrew. I'm not sure what variations you guys considered or knocked around, but I think something like that is what I'm hearing people say they'd like to see. And they're worried that once we open the floodgates, we won't be able to close them again. That'll be litigation. There'll be a lot of market forces to stop us from closing them. That's kind of what I'm hearing. And I think sometimes we look at Styler as though it's a guarantee, like, it's making it legal. But what it said, that is at the end of the decision, it said a different decision might be made. I wrote this down, for what is considered a customary accessory use in a particular community, which is what our building inspector is basing his decision on. But it's an accessory use, and you'd have, you're a lawyer, you'd have to define that for me. But so they didn't say that this is illegal everywhere. They might have made a different decision if they had come to Nantucket and saw that we had, a third of our houses or so, X percent was used that way. They probably might have made a slightly different determination. but I think we want to allow it, but not allow the floodgates to open. So that's what I'm trying to get a handle on.
Well, can I ask Matt on your follow-up? So John, you said that is possible to do that. Do we need 39 and 42 to be able to do what Matt is suggesting? Or can we just do a 39, the general bylaw?
So I think you could start with 39 and get the registry set up and gather the information as to where these rentals are located and who owns them, et cetera. So you could certainly start with just 39. The problem is that if you don't do something with 42, the legal jeopardy that many people will be in is something that I think is worthy of consideration, because the process of going to the building inspector for zoning enforcement, going to the ZBA, it's very expensive for homeowners to defend, and it is an uncertain outcome. What would happen if you had a situation where a judge said, overturned the ZBA and basically threw this entire process into legal chaos? That's what you have to be concerned with here. Not that I'm saying that is likely to happen, but I've been around long enough in the legal profession to know that crazy things can happen in courtrooms. You tend to lose control somewhat of what you're trying to accomplish. And so, and the expense to the homeowner of having to defend these kinds of lawsuits, is that something you should be concerned with?
Andrew?
Can I just add too, in John and my discussion about this, we talked about whether to not do the zoning, but I think, how do we justify collecting fees, taking enforcement action, doing all this activity when we haven't addressed the question of whether it's legal or not? I mean, I think there's an open question on that now. I mean, we're accepting, the state is gathering money. We're accepting quite a bit of resources. And this was something that was debated over and over again. There were at least 4 separate articles that were sponsored to start at least collecting revenue from these short-term rentals over time. So I don't know how we justify that. If there's continuing lawsuits by abutting neighbors on this, which and the point in the lawsuit that's currently pending is alleging it's a commercial use in a residential district. So that leaves that as a completely open question.
Matt?
Yeah, I've talked to both sides of this, that both sides with strongly held opinions in this. And I think that some of those, I think some of that angst would go away if we were working on this. I think some of the lawsuits would disappear while we were working on this. I think that's, I think part of why some of that is happening from both directions right now, we're getting, just for the public to know, the select board and the planning department, we're getting letters from Travelocity, VRBO, all these different, large corporations. And, we're getting, we've got ACT Now has a position, these corporations have a position. We're getting bombarded from all directions because of, this is, some of this is self-interest. And so, I think if we were finding a way where people could still have quiet enjoyment of their properties, where they weren't living, where they knew they weren't living in a place that was overrun with, with this, if it was under control, I think that, some of that would go away. Right now, I think the fear is from both sides. We're going to take it away completely. The other fear, though, is we're not going to take it away at all. And what has become an issue is going to just get worse. So I think there is a middle ground, and I've talked to both sides of it. I'm not sure that the way it's been So the way, so what's happened, we haven't found that middle ground.
Andrew?
Jason, I just want to point out that the planning board's motion on this is basically our motion on 42. So we would discuss 39 first. And if 39 didn't pass, then we're recommending not to pass 42. Because the point is we are working on it. If there's some clear direction, and there has been clear direction from the planning board, the NPDC, the finance committee so far, that they all do support 39. And if we get the clear direction, we can begin the process of looking at those regulations. The town manager has set up, a time for us as staff to, start that process. So as we get closer, we would have at least, the draft outline that people are interested in, and would at least have something worked up for further discussion. So anyway, and there are two different process. One is a general bylaw, one is a zoning bylaw, and so they're separate. But the order was picked deliberately, again. So we would discuss 39 first, and then we would discuss 42. And 42, as you know, has a higher quantum of vote. It has a 2/3 majority, whereas the bylaw has a majority. So.
Thank you, Andrew. Quick question. What would the registry that we would implement here, how would that be different than what the state is doing? What extra information and tools will it give us?
Well, we wouldn't need to know the less than 2-week people, right? Because again, they're registered on the state, but we're not really concerned about them. We would get the information about who the people are. We've heard about real estate trusts and other things. So again, it would be information to know, is it the same people? Is it the same managers? Is it off-island families? Or anyway, there's a number of information or bits of information from the process of registering your short-term rental here that is not included in the state. It's basically the address and some basic information about the owners. We'd want to get contact information for people, so if there were problems, there would be immediate ways to get a hold of them, because the noise, party issues, repeat type things, I thought, again, that has been mentioned as a potential problem. It's not something that hasn't been mentioned. It's I've heard it from several people. If you live next to a party house, you want there to be an ability to, and it's a short-term rental, you want there to be an ability to address it. So I think too that we can get some information about how long they're rented for, and some other information that, again, we still need to discuss. But I think that gives us a better overall picture, and then we can look at that information and then make other decisions as we go forward, depending on what the characteristics of those actual users are.
Another kind of back to the general question, I'll get to you, Matt. Which of these, or is it both of these, that's going to give the community, whether that's annual town meeting, the Board of Health, Select Board administration, to curb the growth of short-term rentals? And I think that's what's unclear for everyone. As someone said earlier, I think you said it, Matt, people are on both sides of this for 39 and 42, to give us the tools to be able to make decisions that actually, so if the community and everyone really wanted to stop investment properties, even if it's for an $8 million property on Pulpus, we don't want an investment company doing that because they're not invested in the community, right? It's not a homeowner who's rented it out for 4 months. They still have neighbors and they still come here, and right? The odds are they're going to want to do the right thing, right? And maybe not have a party house or in that type of area. But an investment company that has no incentive outside of money, versus they're not playing a part in the community. And how do we be able to control that? Because that is something that I support, whether it's $1 million house or a $15 million house. I don't want investment companies coming in. It's 39 or 42. Which ones give us the tools to be able to control that situation? Legally, or your opinion, Andrew?
I think that, again, as we talked about, zoning is about the use. And I think, you know, the professionally owned house or whatever, it's still people who are coming here. They're still vacationers. They're still, you know, part of our summer visitors and other things. So I think that the regulations, again, are the avenue for that. I don't think that, again, when you look at the use of the property, you know, we've talked about we have to take a look at our hotel and guest room definitions and zoning. They're kind of out of date. And there may be a way to look at that. That was one of the concepts that we talked about. You know, if there were more than, you know, 10, 12 units owned by one entity, then it's really like a, you know, a hotel in different locations kind of deal, perhaps. But I think, you know, I think we need to think through the use of the property as much as focusing on the ownership. I think the summer visitors that are here are, you know, again, we really need to know how many of these there are. We only have some very preliminary census figures, and actually the number of occupied homes by mostly owners and renters is the highest it's been for, you know, quite some time at 45%. So housing data is coming out in March. So unfortunately, we don't have the breakdown, and that's going to be, you know, again, 2020 data. So we don't have all of that available right now. But I think, you know, the registry is the way to get more of the data. And as we talked about, as John talked about, Section 14 of the Act does talk about, you know, the number of days a person may operate in a calendar year. There's a whole provision about professionally managed unit in the law that, you know, there could be restrictions or, you know, some sort of discussion around that. I think that could be.
Matt, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just, I saw Steve Visco's here. I'd like to know, you know, what is, you know, is the Board of Health set to do this? Are they, you know, what have their discussions been? Are they ready to do this? And, you know, do they feel comfortable handling this? That's, you know, that's number one, if he's willing to talk to us.
Go Steve.
For you, Jason. Yeah, I've talked to Roberto a little bit about it, and Kathy and John, and, you know, on the, you know, the enforcement side, you know, if this article does pass, that's, you know, under the Human Habitation Code, there's no issue with enforcement. These guys are on calls every day. If it's a nuisance call, noise, anything like that. I think the toughest part, like Andrew was saying, is going to be the registry, and, you know, and then the implementation of that registry to collect data, all the information that goes with it. What are you going to charge them a year? I think the initial part of that is going to be the toughest part for us, but enforcement, I don't see any issue with that at all.
Take one. Chairman, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just thank you for that, Mr. Visco. One thing I wanted to point out is that we are looking at the possibility of a vendor to carry, you know, to deal with much of the registration. You know, a private entity. There are a number of firms that are operating in the region that basically handle much of the registration, you know, process itself, issuing certificates. I know that I believe the town manager has talked or is talking to people in Barnstable that have used such a firm. I've talked to people in the Vineyard that have employed a firm that, you know, would do that. And it's something that I think would be of great assistance. And I think the costs of that would be covered by the fee that's paid for the registration. So.
John?
And Mr. Chairman, I would point out that also on the warrant is the creation of a new revolving fund, so that all of these fees, registration fees, would go into a revolving fund and could be used, or would have to be used, to pay for enforcement and potentially hiring a vendor to help with the registration process. So the funds would be directed for that purpose. I should say the fees would be directed for that purpose.
I'd like to go to the public here shortly. Is there any other questions or comments? It's been a good discussion so far. It's been long overdue for us to have that. Matt, Christy? Okay, while everybody's thinking, can we go to, okay, I just see a lot of hands popping up, which is great. This is not a public hearing, so we don't have to take public comment, but we are. So I'd like everybody to keep it to a minute or two so I can hear, so everyone can hear from everyone. And you can even come back up bring up your hand up later, but let's keep it short. I'm just warning everyone, I don't want to have to cut you off, but just try to keep it short so we can get to everybody. I see maybe 8 or 9 hands up and probably more. So can we go to Brooke Moore? And I will be timing everyone. I have a stopwatch. I'm serious.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question through you, I think, to Town Council. What is the process by which we move from passing Article 39 to actually creating regulations? And specifically, the article's written very clearly to talk about nuisance. And I'm wondering if we want to expand the scope of the regulations to types of operators, number of days. What is the process by which those regulations become part of the bylaw? Like in other words, does it have to go to town meeting? Is it select board? Is it Board of Health only? Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. John?
So the bylaw provides that the authority of the Board of Health, with the approval of the select board, to promulgate regulations to carry out the provisions of the chapter. And those regulations can include, but not limited to, addressing nuisance conditions. So I think it's quite broad in terms of the scope of the regulations that could be enacted. But I think that's going to depend probably on once you have the registry up and running, once we understand the problem, and you're looking at specific restrictions that would be appropriate, it very well may be at that point that the administration would recommend going back to town meeting to further amend the bylaw and bring it to town meeting. It's going to depend on the scope of the problem that's identified and the ways to fix it, I would think.
Thank you, John. We go to Henry Sanford.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate everyone's comments. I just wanted to make a couple observations in that there seems to be a lot of assumptions on how this short-term rental market operates and how short-term rentals actually exist as assets for people. So the first biggest thing I'd like to point out is that once a short-term rental, not always a short-term rental. Short-term rentals can exist for 1 or 2 years to serve a specific purpose. Maybe there's a health problem. I am aware of at least a half a dozen families who were not able to reach Nantucket within the past 2 years and had no choice but to short-term rent their house or to sell it. They chose to short-term rent it. I think that the time split unfairly will favor those with more money and greater employment flexibility. So those who cannot move around, maybe because of their geography or their wealth, will suffer there. And I think that's a quick move that could produce a lot of collateral damage. I think we're in an incredible time to do this, and we have a lot of experience, things to look at. We can look at other towns. We are actually in a good way behind the ball, and we can look at the failures and successes of other communities that are very similar to ours, not Boston, not Charleston, but I'm talking about places like Aspen, Kauai, Malibu, Jackson Hole, geographically isolated places with very unique economies, and we can look at how they succeeded or failed. I think that's incredibly important. And then also, I speak from, people have come up to me and talked to me about this issue. And there are, short-term rentals can be a stepping stone for a lot of people to build middle-class equity on Nantucket. It is a big, most Nantucket homeowners hold a majority of their equity in home ownership, and short-term rentals, for one reason or another, could be a safety net to pull on that home equity without having to sell their piece of Nantucket. And I think that everyone on this board, it might be more entrenched or less entrenched, but sometimes people have to move off Nantucket. And as unfortunate as that is, those people should not be forced to sell. We should give them the same tools that have been being used for generations to maintain ownership on this island. So I just want to put that out there and think we really need a work group here. The town leadership owes it to the large constituency of people who depend on short-term rentals, either for the income or for the jobs they provide, to do a deep study and stop using this fiery rhetoric that I think is just conflating the situation. There's a lot of good short-term rental operators out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. We got Rick Atherton. And if any board members want to speak after something that comes up from the public, please just raise your hand. We can do that as well. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, couple of quick thoughts in my 90 seconds, Jason. First off, I appreciate your discussion, which is a discussion that did not happen at the planning board. I mean, all I have to do is listen to that, and they really didn't spend a lot of time on the substance and future of our island. It seems clear to me that the potential impacts are so substantial, and I'll just say thank you, Henry, for mentioning a work group, which was mentioned before the town meeting last year, but was withdrawn by folks you're familiar with once they won the article vote on 90, which is a shame. That kind of discussion in a work group has to take place before we make such long-term, wide-ranging commitments that are implied by Article 42. 39 might be helpful, that's fine. And if I understand town council, but I respectfully disagree when you use the word nuisance in the article 2 or 3 times, that has an impact. So I think without coming back to town meeting, the real substance of the future of our housing stock is not likely to be resolved in any way through Board of Health regulations. And the only way I think to get to the right answer is to delay the implementation of 42 or postpone it, subject to further discussion, such as you're having tonight, which is great. But to come to a final resolution takes a lot more study. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. We go to Alan Rubenstein.
Yes, I agree with the previous speaker. Clearly, a work group is what is needed here. What Article 42 is simply a rush to judgment. It's getting everything backwards. It's putting the cart before the horse. How can you say what we need is debate on this issue and coming up with a meaningful way to preclude outside investors from buying up properties on Nantucket for short-term rentals? Unfortunately, Article 42 makes every short-term rental legal. That is absolutely bizarre. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. We go to Howard Dickler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief. I would echo Rick. This is the first substantial public discussion on the merits of these and the danger of Articles 39 and 42. 39 is just as problematic as 42 because we're buying a pig in a poke. We don't know what is going to be on the survey. Corporate interests and moneyed corporate interests are so powerful that they hide the ownership. So how are you going to determine ownership? That's a key question. But the middle ground that Matt spoke about is really simple. It's do not enable short-term rentals, do not codify short-term rentals until at the same time the voters have the ability to restrict. So articles should be paired, codification and restriction at the same time. And for that to occur would mean delaying these articles, rejecting these articles, and going back to the planning board, going back to study groups and figuring it out, because the neighborhoods of the island are at risk and there's no substantive reason to take that risk. The only reason we've given is there might be a few lawsuits against people, but I think if we're working on it, there will not be, just as Matt said. So I beg the planning board to make their comment that we need more time before we go forward with any articles such as 39 and 42. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Can we go to Kathy Bard?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, hi, Kathy. Hi, I'm Kathy Baird, and actually sitting in my home here on Nantucket. And I have just a couple of real questions. I think that one of the things I just want to ask is I think that the lawsuits that have been filed are not only against individuals, but also against the town. So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Article 42 would kind of make that go away so that the lawsuits would stop. I think that, as Howard said, binding 42 and 39 together are something that gives the town a baseline to start from. It stops the lawsuits, it stops the neighbor versus neighbor, and it gives us the ability to do the regulations that are formed in basis. And I think what I remember from hearing at the planning board meeting is that the legal counsel who, I forget her name, was speaking there, talked about regulations in 39 being needing a basis, so that the idea of solving a problem, saying, okay, here's the problem. Well, for example, Jason, you mentioned we need to stop the growth of short-term rentals. The question is really, is there a growth or isn't there? And I think what Andrew was saying is that we don't really know yet. And that's part of what 39 would help figure out. The state database doesn't show that. It shows how many short-term rentals there are. If you've ever registered, you're on that database forever, even if you stop. And if you sell your property, somebody else registers, it's there twice. So it's really not a good number right now to know, but I don't know that we know if there's growth. If there's growth, yeah, then we need to deal with it. But I think the data needs to be there. And the working group idea is a great one. I don't know. Somebody said it was stopped by some group. I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to participate in such a thing. So I think that a work group would be great. I think that we need basis for any and data for any regulations that go forward that are, if you do this, you're doing it for a reason to stop something, and that you're also doing it because there's a problem, not because you just feel like it. I think that's important. And also the data needs to show, okay, if we implement this, what is the economic impact on the island? Because I think that matters as well. So thank you for hearing from me, and I appreciate the time this evening and the discussion that's finally happening as well.
Thank you, Kathy. I think maybe if I didn't say it right, I want to clarify that. I want us to have the tools to be able to control the growth of short-term rentals, right? And I'm not really sure exactly how that is all going to happen with 39 and 42. We go to Robin Knights.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really don't understand objections to either 39 or 42. And I think planning has presented a very elegant framework for taking the first steps towards this problem, because with 39, you have two things. One, you have data collection. So instead of operating on rumor and anecdote, you can finally get data as to what's going on. And the second is you have a regulatory framework that can evolve over time. So that's what you get in 39. And all that 42 does is stops the legal jeopardy, as John Giorgio and Andrew have mentioned, that is currently going on for a tradition that's gone on for centuries. And I don't believe that if there is a working group, the lawsuits are going to go away, because planning presented this framework on, I think it was February 8th. On February the 9th was the announcement of the appeal and the rejection of the ZBA decision and the next lawsuit. So I really think that 39 and 42 is a very healthy way to go forward and start to regulate today and base decisions based on data collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. We go to Bruce Mandel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Andrew's and John Giorgio's explanations. They've been very helpful, and your and Matt's insightful comments are very helpful. I'm wondering, can someone please address that our comments, or at least a comment upon our communities on the island, have unique characteristics that in some cases are very different from the other communities. And how does what seems to be a one-size-fits-all communities proposal serve those differing community characteristics? And then how do we avoid disparate treatments of certain communities in certain areas? I hope that question is clear enough, but it just seems that we're trying to address the problem with a one-size-fits-all solution when our communities are quite different from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. John, Andrew, I think we kind of touched on that, didn't we, with some of Matt's questions about, can you do things in different areas even without Article 42? I think you read it. You read something, John, that said that yes, we could.
Yeah, yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. The problem with trying to do that in Article 42 is it's a zoning bylaw. And there are limitations on how you can regulate through zoning, including the form of ownership. 39 is intended to gather the information, and then we can take a look at it and decide if there's a problem, where is the problem, how do you address that problem, and either address that through the regulations authorized in 39 or go back to town meeting with a more expansive bylaw, a general bylaw, that would regulate the activity of short-term rentals as described in the statute. So this is going to be a multi-step process. There's no question about it. But in order to get started, we really need to gather that data first.
Thank you, John. Andrew?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to comment that both the chair of the NPDC and the acting chair of the planning board, are both here on the meeting. There are other members here, and we spent a lot of time on this. So it's not like there was a brief meeting. There was like a 4-hour meeting where we discussed this. So, and I do think that zoning is not a homeowners association. We have very broad limits, just like you say, a single family home can be used, and there's all kinds of different ways that home is used by people. So, and saying like an off-island, can be a number of different variations. It can be like Henry Sanford said, the owner who's temporarily off island, or the family that's owned the house for years and years that just doesn't live here. In addition to the off-island investor. So those distinctions are not going to be found in zoning. And I think they're going to take a lot of work to separate all that out through regulations, which I think is the only place where something like that is going to be valid.
Thanks, Andrew. I know you have went over this a lot with different boards. We have it here, and I think it's taken a while for people to process this, and it's confusing, and I think it helps to us to have some public discourse, and we'll probably do it again before the select board puts in their comments. Can we go to Ed Sanford?
Hi. Thank you, Jason, for letting me speak. I'll try to be brief. I agree with a lot of the comments. The town absolutely has to study what has happened to the housing stock on this island over, I don't know what time frame. I will just say 5 years. Much of the comment I hear is anecdotal. I've been in the real estate business for 30 plus years, and I have yet to see Marriott Corporation or hedge funds or REITs or anything even remotely close to that come in and start buying Nantucket real estate, which is not to say, they're peeking around the corner, but certainly we can study the history of what's happened on Nantucket with the housing stock over the last maybe 5 to 10 years. It's all public information. If you put together the appropriate group who can really dig into this, maybe we can come up with some data that indicates really what's going on. I mean, the narrative right now, I'll say it flat out, has been generated by ACtNow. And that narrative is that short-term rentals are destroying the year-round housing stock. And I don't personally believe it. And I've been an advocate for year-round housing since the mid-90s when I was the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee for 3 years. So this is not a problem that's been generated by Airbnb and VRBO. It's been generated by the tremendous popularity of this island. And so we really need to get a committee together of citizens and of town officials to sit down around the table and spend the hours it's going to take to understand how the housing environment is transitioning on this island. And until we understand that, you can't do anything. And the last thing I'll say is I'm perplexed why people are opposed to 42 and 39. I mean, it is the foundation for regulating short-term rentals. And if we don't do it, if we don't pass 42, then there's a good chance that the lawsuit that somebody mentioned a minute ago, which is Catherine Ward, who lives on Dover Street, is suing her backyard neighbor on she's on Silver. She's suing her backyard neighbor on West Dover Street. And she's asking the judge to rule that short-term rentals are a commercial use and therefore illegal in the residential old historic district. If that lawsuit is upheld, I'll ask through the chair to the town council, does that have a domino effect and go to every other residential district on the island? And if they're deemed illegal, what happens to the Nantucket economy? Thank you.
John, do you want to answer that?
Well, certainly, if that were to occur, I would fully anticipate that there would be an appeal. And once that appeal is decided in either the appeals court or the Supreme Judicial Court, that would be binding precedent. And I don't see any reason why it wouldn't apply equally to other zoning districts. If the determination is that short-term rentals is a commercial use. So it would apply in any zoning district where commercial use is prohibited.
Thank you, John. We go to David Iverson.
Thank you. So I've been the sitting chair on this discussion at the planning board, and I've heard literally 20 hours of these discussions and public comment, and I think that everyone's concerns are viable. But I think the common theme here is everyone's asking for two things, and that's more data and an ability to restrict. And I think what people really need to look at is what we're offering here at 42 and 39 is giving them exactly those two things. Through 42, well, more through 39, we'll have a registration. We will get more data than we could possibly hope for any other way, along with a framework for restriction. So, I think that it's important that people realize that and stop focusing in on misinformation and negative information. As far as housing goes, the Plus Department looked into the R10 district to see over 12-year period and to see what houses flipped. And R10's mostly what most of the locals live in. And what they found was there was 5 houses in a 12-year period that flipped over to short-term rentals. So I think there's a relationship there. Is it as dire as everyone says? I haven't seen the data that proves that yet. And one thing that's missing out of this whole conversation tonight is we as a community need to think long and hard about what the economic impact of limiting short-term rentals to accessory use only. I think that there wouldn't be a business on our island that it wouldn't touch in a negative way. So, I mean, that's just kind of what I've observed through all these meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Go to Nat Lowell.
There we go.
Go ahead, Nat.
Hi, thank you, Jason, for that. So to echo a little bit what Dave said, just to go to another point is the zoning discussion. Nantucket started out in 1972 with 4 districts. And we have, since 2005, created a lot of tailored districts to go with what was built, what the trends were in certain areas of the island. But when this is discussed as far as a commercial use with rentals in residential zones, I mean, that is like an incredibly difficult thing to wrap your heads around. I mean, we've removed over the years hotels from RC, making RC2, which was done due to the NAWSHOP, what came in before NAWSHOP there in the early 80s. And I mean, we've done a lot to fix zoning, to make it right, to make it fit the uses. But what happens in a residential use is, as far as rentals goes, I mean, that would be the most impossible thing to regulate, essentially through zoning changes. And what Article 42 does is sort of reset an ongoing tradition that's been happening for decades. And 39, as Dave said, and as everyone has said, sets up the beginning of regulating. And what's been basically an unregulated activity until the state decided to define STRs in 2019. I mean, this has been dropped on our head during COVID. which we kind of forget. And there's been a lot more people wanting to come here to escape wherever they're from. So that's another piece to this. It got dropped the year before COVID. So I think we need to all kind of, just sort of gather ourselves a little bit and think about our neighbors. I mean, I don't like to see the lawsuit stuff. Watching those ZBA meetings was painful. And to me, a few lawsuits is something to be concerned about. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your time and talking about this tonight.
Thanks, Nat. I feel like we've, all right, well, we'll go one more. Mr. Atherton, go ahead. And then we'll wrap up any conclusions and look at next steps. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, Jason, thank you. Just in terms of lawsuits, and I'm not responding just to that. I've always been concerned that our select board is more susceptible to fear of lawsuits and giving in than the planning board. The planning board historically has been willing to fight applicants who disagreed with their decisions, and a number of lawsuits, many over the years, have carried through the court system. And I appreciate the planning board for taking that position. And I hope the fear of these lawsuits is not driving the planning board or the select board. Once you start down that path, it's like blackmail, and you are in real trouble for developing good long-term community-based decisions based on data. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. We'll go to Henry Sanford, and then we'll go to Henry Sanford, and then we'll wrap this up, please. Henry?
Sorry, guys. Sorry. I just want to say in regards to the lawsuits, and what Andrew mentioned as how do you get people to contribute to a registry if they're under the threat of this lawsuit, and to address what Mr. Atherton just said, is that this is a real economic fear for the homeowner. I think the town should certainly be concerned about the legal jeopardy and the cost that could produce. You're talking about, I think, in a conservative estimate, 1,500 special permits if 43 were to pass, or at least those number of people who would be in legal jeopardy if we do not pass 42. And so this is not just a cost to the town, but to our community members. I mean, as Mr. Giorgio pointed out, the cost to the homeowner is large, and could very quickly either force a sale or force a decision. And I would just say that we're under a time constraint because a lawsuit has been filed, on against that West Overstreet owner. And we can either make this decision as a town and we can vote on this as a community, or we can have a judge in land court decide it for us. So I think that's why 39 and 42 are so important. And just to shed light on the lawsuit threat from people who actually do short-term rentals, it is a real fear amongst many people. So thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Any other comments, thoughts, Matt and Christy? Go ahead, Christy.
I think, what I heard from the community is that need for a work group. And I know that we mentioned this last year, and we had the joint meeting. I think it was the planning board, MPDC, select board, FinCom. We all got together last summer and started talking about short-term rentals. And I'm just wondering kind of how do we get that momentum back? And is that something that we may want to consider as a comment for town meeting from the board to try to put together? And when we talk about a work group, we always have to go back to what is kind of the point of it and what is going to be their charge. And I think something that I've heard from everybody is we're really concerned about the social fabric of our communities and maintaining year-round housing. And I'm not so sure that has to do with short-term rentals. I think that it plays a part, and I think the data is going to help us determine that. But I think we want to keep the conversation going of what would this work group go, or how would it go forward, and how do we kind of maintain some policies, and how do we start talking about maintaining more year-round housing? So my might be two separate work groups, but something that I've heard from the community tonight.
Christy, Matt?
Yeah, I think some of the numbers exist. I think Ed Sanford is right. And I remember when he was, in comp plan days, he was spending weeks and weeks counting lot by lot, doing a build out, and the build out came out, close to what the build out everyone said wasn't true. It ended up being true. I think the data is there. I think we have to go back, 5 or 10 years to get a look at it. I think COVID has accelerated changes that were going to happen in our community and around the world. It has just sped it up, and this is no different. And I think, sort of the real estate sales and the urban flight that has come here and the loss of housing for, employees and year-round people, it is, it has been sped up by that, has been magnified. And I don't see that. I don't see how that changes. I don't think we could, even if we got the 2%, we couldn't build fast enough. As Christy said earlier, we can't build houses fast enough to, to make up for that. And where do we put them? And is that a place we even want to live? If we build, that many more homes, do we even want to live in that? I spoke to a summer resident today who was saying, geez, what are you going to do about traffic? You should limit cars. And I said, I tried to do that 20 years ago. He said it took 45 minutes this summer for me to bring my child down to swimming lessons, 45 minutes each way. And, so I think all these things are kind of are interrelated. And I don't buy the idea that, well, it's not, I don't buy it. I see there is a direct economic impact if we stop this. If we say, okay, you can't do it anymore, that would have an impact. But I think just as much would be an impact if we say, you know what, we can do this everywhere you want, as much as you want, and anyone who wants to do it can do it. That would have an impact on the island as well. So that's like, I think it would, and when you, and just for fun, go and look, you can go on VRBO and some of those and just look. There are bunk houses. These houses are, 15, 20,000 a week, 6, 8, 12 people in a bunk room. It's a whole different deal. It's not a family of 4 or 5, so the question is, where do you draw the line? Those are the types of uses that really are bordering on commercial. And I don't have the answer to this, but I think it's, if it's a family, 5 or 6 people and they're treating it as a residence, that's one thing. If it's every weekend, if you have a wedding there, it's a whole different use. If you've got 26 people in the house, which some of if you look at the advertisements, it's, sleeps 16, sleeps 22, sleeps 12, 3 bathrooms. Those are the ones that are the nuisance ones, but they're also, I think, some of the ones that are they border on commercial. If it has webbed feet and quacks, it's a duck, And so I think that's how, and I don't know how we get a handle on that. I grew up, and I'm not against it. I grew up with, my family grew up having to rent rooms and rent out our house in the summer. And we moved to a shack, and my mom ran the jetties, and we lived above the jetties in the office with my sisters sleeping in a closet. So I know, the upward mobility. I know how important it is, but I also know that, we have to find a way to find a reasonable balance. I was fortunate, I've told this before, I'll just finish. I was fortunate to speak to Walter Barnaky before he passed, a number of years ago. And one of his regrets, when he was talking to me, was that Nantucket was turning every home, every residence into a mini hotel. And when he advised the Lagasse family in Newburyport, Mass, he advised them, don't go the way of Nantucket. If you do, you'll lose your residences, you'll lose your neighborhoods. He advised them to put large hotels on the waterfront, which is what they've done. And so, I listened to the wisdom that he had. I think I take that with me and sort of to caution us a little bit. So, I'm not, and the other thing I worry about, codify now, regulate later. I think codifying something, making it legal, I understand what John is saying, and I respect him, but I still have a little twinge about that because I worry about that in the future. So for now, I'm happy we've had this discussion. I think it was, overdue at our level and very needed. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt, for your comments tonight. We'll have another chance to put a comment in, another agenda item in 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know exactly the date, Libby, to put a comment in if we want to on 39. We don't have to do that now. I'm not ready for it. Libby?
I was just going to say, I think it's March 16th.
16th, okay. Is that okay if we do that then? Matt, Christie, process this, okay. Mr. Visco, did you have anything you wanted to say? Okay. Thanks for being here tonight, appreciate it. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks everybody who commented. Everybody kept it short and kept it brief, but kept it impactful, and I appreciate it. The first time you spoke, Mr. Atherton, you were 93 seconds, so you were 3 seconds over. I'm just kidding. Andrew, anything else? John?
Nope.
Okay. On to select board comments. Anything? Christy, you usually have something.
Not tonight.
Matt?
Coastal Resilience, I'll do it quick. Coastal Resiliency met on Tuesday. Courtney Rocha, who is a Southeast Regional Coordinator for Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. So she talked about MVP grants and talked about, she gave us, what's the best way to position yourself? How do they look at them, et cetera. And basically what she was saying was, they favor green. They want to make sure that there's equity involved, that it's serving as many people as possible. And so we got a lot of good insight from her. She basically said, write it as though it's going to someone in Florida that doesn't know Nantucket and doesn't know what you do. Don't assume we know. Make sure you write it that way. And so I think that was very helpful. And Coastal Resiliency is going to probably, is also had a discussion about, what is the role for that group going forward, et cetera, and asked what we thought the role would be. And, I think that group is doing a good job and is very important in sort of helping to keep us on the town on track. And so, at some point going forward, we have to sort of sort that out. But I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Christy?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jason, aye. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion tonight.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Have a good night.